Lord Eddard Stark stood by the window of his private solar in the Red Keep, fingers wound tightly around the sill. Dawn had barely broken over King's Landing, and the sun spread the palest light upon the city's towering walls. Somewhere beneath those stone battlements and crooked streets, the city was waking to learn that King Robert Baratheon was dead. This truth, like so many others, had not yet rung from bells or been cried in the streets, but all the hush in the corridors of the Red Keep told Ned that by midday, the capital would swirl with rumors, half-truths, and more worrisome still, manipulations. He drew a slow breath, letting the moist air from Blackwater Bay push into the room, thick with salt and the faint stench of rotting fish. The noise of gulls drifted through the arrow-slit window. In the silence behind him was the new weight of knowledge he had uncovered, that Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen were no true Baratheons, that Robert had died without leaving behind a legitimate heir of his own blood, and that the realm now stood on the brink of chaos. Ned thought of Robert, boisterous and strong, a friend he had loved and followed into rebellion years ago. He shut his eyes as a pang shot through his heart. How could the gods be so cruel to take him in such a cowardly way? A hunting accident, a bloody boar, some cask of ill-timed strong wine. Perhaps that was the cruelest part, the small, humiliating end to a once towering man. Yet as grief weighed on him, another heavier burden pressed on his shoulders. The realm would never accept the truth of Joffrey's parentage lightly, least of all the Lannisters. By the time Ned had discovered the secret, Robert lay dying, unable to take any action himself. The king had left Ned with a letter that proclaimed Eddard as protector of the realm, naming him regent until Joffrey came of age. But that letter would be worthless if Joffrey was no heir at all. Ned's first instinct, the moment Robert had succumbed, had been to confront Cersei, brandish the truth, and see her imprisoned for treason. But there was a flicker of cautious sense that had stayed his hand. Cersei would strike back before the words left Ned's mouth, and she had half the city in her power, from the gold cloaks of the city watch to the courtiers who thrived on Lannister gold. If he was to do right by Robert, by the realm, and by his own honor, he had to be clever or else stand by and watch House Lannister crown its bastard boy. He took the letter that Robert had signed, his dying words for the governance of the Seven Kingdoms, and turned it between his hands. The parchment seemed to tremble, or perhaps it was his own hand that shook. Robert had meant for Ned to take the reins. But in Ned's heart, he knew another truth that felt far heavier than the roll of paper. The next rightful king by the laws of succession was the elder of Robert's brothers, Lord Stannis Baratheon. If Robert's children were indeed bastards, the crown belonged to Stannis, stern and unyielding though the man was. Ned recalled Stannis's abrupt manner, the cold intelligence in his pale eyes, and the determined set of his jaw. That man would make for a severe king, but a just one. He was Robert's rightful heir. It was as simple as that. Ned exhaled, turned from the window, and carefully slid the parchment into a drawer of a heavy oaken table. He could almost hear the voices of his ancestors in his head, reminding him of House Stark's words. Winter is coming. Doom would follow if the realm fell into the wrong hands. Justice was not always a shining blade in the open. At times, it was a dagger in the dark, swift and sure before tyrants could seat themselves upon a throne. Ned did not like secrecy or scheming, but for Robert he would endure it. For the safety of the realm, Ned Stark would do what must be done. He glanced at the door, feeling the stillness of the corridor beyond. He had told the guards to keep away all visitors for this hour. For the moment, at least, no one clamored to see the new protector of the realm. On the table lay a quill, a pot of ink, and blank parchment. His decision was made. He would not unseal Robert's letter before the council, not yet. Instead, he would write to Stannis, the rightful heir, calling him to claim the throne. But how to do that discreetly with so many eyes upon him? Maesters were sworn to secrecy in sending letters for their lords. But Ned knew Varys the Spider had his own ways of gleaning knowledge. That was as certain as ice was cold. If Varys learned, so would half the city. If Cersei Lannister discovered Ned's letter to Stannis, she would not wait to move. She would strike at him or worse, threaten Sansa and Arya. Ned fought a shudder. His daughters were his greatest worry. Sansa, betrothed to Joffrey, was all but a hostage in the Red Keep, and Arya was too bold by half to navigate the pitfalls of a cunning court. But Ned's blood burned. He would not let them be caught in any noose Cersei might string for him. The best path, he decided, was to write, and to ensure the letter left the castle in secret, entrusted to someone who could slip out of King's Landing unnoticed. There was only one man he could think of for so delicate a mission. Jory Castle was dead, so Ned would have to rely on one of the last loyal men he had, young Tomard or perhaps Desmond. These men he had brought from Winterfell were worthy, but was it fair to burden them with a mission that could cost their lives if discovered? He ran a hand through his hair. Honor demanded that he must. He dipped the quill in ink, paused for a moment to steady his resolve, and began writing in a neat, soldierly script. To the Lord of Dragonstone, Stannis of House Baratheon. As the words flowed, he could practically see Stannis's expression at reading them. Stern, outraged, but also galvanized. For if there was one man in the Seven Kingdoms who would not rest until he received the crown that was his by right, it was Stannis Baratheon. He would come with fire, with ships, with a hardened conviction sharper than any Lannister sword. And if it led to blood, Ned thought grimly, then it was blood that should be on Cersei and Jaime's heads for such vile treachery as passing off bastards for Robert's children. He finished the letter, sealed it with the dire wolf of House Stark, and let the wax harden. A great tension coiled within him. He set the letter aside and sank onto a wooden chair, head in his hands. Would this be the ruin of the realm, or its salvation? The lines between right and ruin were thin as a hair when the Game of Thrones was in play. Ned had never wanted to be a piece in that game, nor a player. But his loyalty to Robert, his loyalty to truth, demanded that he act. When he felt calmer, he left the Solar, keeping the sealed letter tucked in his belt. The corridors were beginning to bustle, the Red Keep's servants on morning errands, the gold cloaks on patrol. Ned walked with a purposeful stride, face set, trusting that those who saw him would interpret his expression as that of a grieving friend or a man weighed down by the Regency. At the corridor's bend, he spotted Peter Baelish approaching, wearing a small, knowing smile. "Ah, Lord Stark," Baelish said in that soft, mocking tone of his. "A sorrowful day for the realm, is it not? I trust you know that the council awaits your presence this morning." Ned forced himself to nod. "I will come, but not yet. I have urgent business first. I will be at the council session before long." Littlefinger inclined his head, always polite. "Of course, my lord. If you find you need guidance on any small matter of gold or influences, you know where to find me." There was a spark in Baelish's eye, as if he could guess Ned was up to something, or perhaps that was just Baelish being Baelish. Spiders spun webs, crows scoured corpses, and Littlefinger smiled with his secrets. That was how the world went. Ned only gave him a curt nod. Baelish moved on, footsteps echoing in the gloom. At once, Ned's sense of caution grew stronger. He could not so much as slip to the stables for a ride without Peter or Varys noticing. Best to keep his expression stern and unreadable. At last, in a less frequented passageway, Ned found one of his men, Desmond, a loyal guardsman who had traveled from Winterfell. Desmond bowed at once, though his worried gaze asked 1,000 questions. Ned pressed the letter into his hand. "Take this and guard it with your life," Ned whispered, glancing both ways along the corridor. "Deliver it to Maester Wolkan at the Tower of the Hand. Do not be seen. He is to send it by Raven to Dragonstone with none the wiser. Not even Varys can know." Desmond's eyes widened. Dragonstone. He knew precisely who held that seat. "Yes," Ned said. "I cannot explain more here. Just do as I ask." Desmond clenched his jaw. "Aye, my lord." Ned nodded, watched him go with quick, purposeful steps, and felt as if part of his heart were carried away in that sealed parchment. It was done. Now he must find a way to keep Cersei from clawing for power until Stannis could respond. He swallowed thickly and turned back toward the heart of the Red Keep. By midday, the royal council gathered in the same chamber that had so often held Robert in his wide seat, flanked by his advisors. Only now, The seat at the head of the table was empty, save for a lavish embroidered cushion to mark the absence of the king. Ned took the hand's seat, restlessly aware of the eyes upon him. Grand Maester Pycelle was there, solemn-faced in his long white beard. Lord Renly Baratheon sat as well, Robert's younger brother, dark-haired and handsome in his green doublet worked with gold stags. Peter Baelish leaned back in his chair, gracefully crossing one leg over the other, wearing that near-constant half-smile. Varys drifted in with soft footfalls, looking like a plump pink spider in silks. Ned cleared his throat, glancing around at the assembly. "The king," he began, then his voice caught a moment. "Robert is gone. King Robert is gone from us. The realm must mourn him, and we must see to the line of succession. The matter is urgent." Renly's jaw tightened. "Aye, it is. My brother has left us too soon. But we have Prince Joffrey for the throne now. We must plan the coronation. Unless you have discovered something else, Lord Stark." Renly's eyes flicked to Ned with the faintest flicker of suspicion. Ned met his stare. He could not reveal all, not yet. "We have time to see that the succession is handled properly. Until Prince Joffrey is crowned, I hold Robert's letter naming me protector of the realm. I will govern in the king's stead." Renly's nostrils flared. "That is your right by King Robert's final words. Will you name Joffrey as the new king? The realm is unsettled. The gold cloaks need direction. The Lannisters are—" Peter Baelish coughed softly, an interruption that drew all eyes. "My lord, please do not forget that a certain courtesy is owed to the Queen Regent. Cersei Lannister awaits an audience, no doubt. She is preparing to present her son as the rightful heir, and if we do anything to thwart that, we might find ourselves in more precarious standing with House Lannister." Ned forced an even tone. "I have no intention of encouraging ill will with the Lannisters, but I have every intention of ensuring the realm is well served. Joffrey is but a boy, we must be careful. When the time is right, I will speak to the court." Varys's fingers laced. "Oh, indeed, we must be quite careful. The small folk are anxious. Soldiers can sense an impending shift in power. A sudden move might cause the pot to boil over." His placid face gave nothing away. "If I may, my lord, do you plan to question the parentage of the royal children?" The question felt like a scorpion's sting in Ned's mind. He battled to keep his expression blank. Varys was too perceptive, and Ned would not give anything away. "I plan to weigh every piece of evidence before me, and only then decide." Renly drummed his fingers on the table, his voice growing clipped. "My Lord Stark, we cannot linger too long. The Lannisters have men in the city. My brother, Robert's dying wish was for you to protect the realm, but that requires action." Ned breathed in, wishing he could trust Renly, but uncertain. Renly might also have ambitions. Some had whispered that Renly had once proposed Ned side with him, to seize the throne himself, or at least crown Renly in place of Stannis. Ned swallowed that memory. "I will act, Lord Renly," he said softly. "Trust that my first action will be to maintain order, then to do what is right for the succession." Renly's gaze lingered a fraction longer than comfort allowed, but he nodded. The rest of the council accepted Ned's words grudgingly. No doubt each suspected he had some hidden card to play, but none dared press him further. When the meeting adjourned, Ned had the uneasy sense that half of them would hurry to their own networks of spies to glean more. And so it began. The Game of Thrones, swirling with new intensity now that Robert was gone. Ned left as quickly as he could, ignoring Peter's attempts to sidle up for a private conversation. Let the council spin its own webs. Ned had done what was necessary. Back in his solar, he summoned Tomard to his side. "Recall our men," Ned told him. "Have them keep watch around Sansa and Arya. If the Lannisters so much as look in their direction, I want to know." Tomard bowed. "Aye, my lord." Ned pressed a hand to his temple. The tension was unrelenting. He remembered the name Barristan Selmy, slipping through his thoughts. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, an honorable knight, might be an ally. If Ned could confide in him that the children were not Robert's, and that Stannis was the rightful heir, Barristan might stand for the rightful king. But it was a dangerous assumption. The Kingsguard served the crown, and if the crown passed to Joffrey, Barristan might remain loyal to the boy unless he had absolute proof. Proof. That word echoed in Ned's mind. He had gleaned enough from the Book of Lineages and from Gendry's existence. Still, how many lords would be convinced? They would demand more than black hair and features to dethrone a seated claimant. A dire business, he whispered, rubbing his brow. The city beyond that window was a tangle of possibilities, and each road was fraught with risk. But at least the ravens were on their way to Dragonstone, to the man who would do anything to claim what was his by right. Late in the evening, Ned found a moment of respite with his daughters. Sansa was subdued, eyes puffy from crying. She had idolized Robert and believed Joffrey a charming prince. Arya was more furious than sad, pacing the room like a caged wolf pup, muttering how it was all the Lannisters' fault. Ned knelt beside Arya and took her hand. "Child, you must stay quiet," he cautioned her. "Watch and listen. If you sense any threat, come to me or to your septa. Do not speak out or defy the queen. These are dangerous times." Arya glowered. "I hate them," she said, voice full of raw anger. "I don't want Sansa to marry Joffrey." Ned's heart twisted. "That engagement may change, but you must keep that to yourself. Do you understand? You must keep your head low." She nodded uncertainly. Then Ned touched Sansa's shoulder. "Daughter, I know you are sorrowful, but be cautious. The queen might try to use you as a pawn. If she tries to question you or trick you, remain polite but reveal nothing." Sansa sniffed, tears rolling down her cheeks. "But Father Joffrey, he will be king. Am I not supposed to be his queen? And we can mourn King Robert together." The sweet naivety of Sansa's illusions pained Ned's heart, for he knew they would soon shatter. "All will be well, Sansa," he said softly. "Just remember what I've told you. Soon we may leave King's Landing." Sansa's eyes flicked up in alarm. "Leave?" "Yes," Ned told her, though he could not explain more. If the city turned into a war zone between Lannister and Baratheon, he would not have his daughters caught in it. Once Stannis was near, Ned would send them safely away, if the gods were merciful. Leaving them with instructions to remain in their chambers, he departed. A longing for Winterfell tugged at him. The north was open air and honest cold. Here in King's Landing, every breath tasted of fear and secrets. He would endure it for as long as it took to see justice done. Night hung heavy over the Red Keep, and Ned had trouble finding sleep. He lay awake in his bed, the flickering candle casting long shadows over the stone walls. Thoughts churned of Stannis crossing the sea from Dragonstone with his ships, an army of men loyal to the rightful Baratheon. The city might fight back. Tywin Lannister would not let the Iron Throne slip away without a fight. War seemed inevitable. Ned feared for the small folk, for the blood that would stain the realm. But if there was a path to avert war, it would require cunning and alliances. Could Ned remain silent about Joffrey's parentage and hold the city stable until Stannis arrived? That felt like a betrayal of truth. But to declare it publicly now would prompt immediate bloodshed. And so he waited, telling himself that the truth was written in that letter, now speeding by Raven to Dragonstone. Soon enough, events would unfold. He drifted off, dreams swirling of wolves and stags in some dark wood, their eyes gleaming in the moonlight, war horns echoing. He awoke before sunrise, set about his morning routine, and then braced himself for whatever new challenge the day would bring. Sure enough, as soon as he broke his fast, a messenger arrived from the Queen. He was summoned to the throne room, where Cersei Lannister stood with her son, Prince Joffrey, wearing black to mark their mourning. Ned did not like the triumphant gleam in her green eyes. The towering hall felt oppressive, the rows of gilded columns looming like giant watchers. The Iron Throne itself rose behind Joffrey like a monstrous beast of twisted swords. Ned knelt and rose. Cersei's smile was thin, her golden hair coiled artfully. "Lord Stark," she said, "in light of King Robert's tragic demise, we must proceed with the coronation of my son." He is eager to assume his responsibilities. Joffrey, standing to her right, tried to assume a regal air but wore a half-petulant glare. The boy had not the faintest humility of a king, nor the kindly manner that Robert had once displayed. "Lord Stark, I am to be your king. You shall kneel to me now and pledge your loyalty, as you did to my father." His voice quavered with a barely contained arrogance. Ned inclined his head stiffly. "Your Grace, let us not be hasty. King Robert named me protector of the realm until you come of age. Perhaps it is best if we wait until the realm is better prepared for a coronation. There are matters of the royal treasury, the security of the city, all that must be set in order first." Cersei's gaze flickered. "My son is quite of age to be crowned," she insisted. "This is his birthright. By law, the throne passes to him immediately on Robert's death. The coronation is merely a formality." Ned forced calm. "A formality that can be dangerous if done without the lords of the realm present. We must summon the great houses to bear witness. Surely you would want the realm united behind Prince Joffrey." He saw the annoyance tightening Cersei's face. She was no fool. She knew he was delaying. Joffrey's eyes narrowed. He looked to his mother, uncertain whether to explode in outrage. The Queen laid a hand on his arm to still him, then addressed Ned again. "Very well, we shall send ravens, summon the lords. But as soon as they arrive, the ceremony shall proceed, and you will place the crown on my son's head, Lord Stark." Ned bowed slightly, feeling the tension coiled in the watchers around them. The Kingsguard, in white cloaks and golden armor, stood arrayed like silent statues. Ser Boros and Ser Meryn, men he did not trust. Ser Barristan, older but still formidable, stood near the throne as well. If it came to violence, Ned would be outnumbered. But for now, the Queen wanted to maintain the illusion of legitimacy. She needed him to bless Joffrey's claim until she could safely discard him. "Of course, Your Grace," Ned said in a neutral tone. "We all want what is best for the realm." Joffrey smirked, thinking it an assent. But Cersei's green eyes bored into Ned, her silent challenge clear. She would not let him or anyone else stand in Joffrey's way. Ned returned her gaze unflinching. The real storm was yet to come. Days passed, thick with tension that seeped into every corner of the Red Keep. Rumors spread that the Hand and the Queen were at odds. The Gold Cloaks patrolled with more vigilance, and Ned heard scattered reports of Lannister men gathering in the Westerlands under Tywin's command. In response, Ned tried to bolster the City Watch with men loyal to the throne, paying them from the royal treasury. But Baelish controlled the treasury strings, and each time Ned attempted to shuffle gold, Baelish appeared with a sympathetic smile, twisting the matter so that the funds were delayed or misdirected. Lord Renly hovered on the edges of Ned's life, throwing him questioning looks but never pressing too hard. Ned suspected Renly had secrets of his own, whispers that he sought allies among the more charismatic courtiers who disliked the Lannisters. But a wedge existed between them, though they were both Baratheon supporters. Ned's heart remained set on Stannis, while Renly seemed uncertain or perhaps believed he, being more popular, might press his own claim. Nonetheless, neither man fully trusted the other. At last, some 7 nights after Robert's death, a raven arrived from Dragonstone. Maester Wolkan came to Ned's solar late in the evening, carrying the sealed parchment with the sun and flame crest of House Baratheon stamped in red wax. Ned thanked him and broke the seal alone, eyes devouring the message. "Lord Stark, your words are received. I accept my rightful claim, and I demand the fealty of all lords in the 7 kingdoms. Be warned that I march on King's Landing in a fortnight. I am gathering my fleet and my bannermen. This city and throne are mine by every law of gods and men. I trust you shall not waver. Make certain the city's defenses are prepared to yield to me as its lawful king. If my brother's bastards or the Lannisters stand in the way, they shall face the king's justice. Stannis Baratheon, by right of blood, king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, lord of the 7 kingdoms and protector of the realm." Ned felt a shiver. A fortnight. The tide of war was coming, unstoppable as winter. Stannis would want to sweep in, dethrone Joffrey immediately, and punish every Lannister conspirator. If Ned wanted to spare King's Landing from a violent sacking, he had only a little time to pave the way for Stannis' entry, if that was even possible. Cersei would not open the gates to him, even if Ned declared him rightful king. She would fight. Tywin would fight. The city would become a battlefield. Yet Ned also felt a measure of grim relief. Robert's last wish, that truth and justice prevail, might yet be fulfilled if Stannis arrived. Ned only hoped he could keep Sansa and Arya safe. That was paramount. They must not be used as hostages or pawns. The thought of violence erupting in the streets where his daughters lived made him clench his fists. Perhaps a diplomatic approach was possible. Could he, in his capacity as protector, call the City Watch to remove Joffrey from the throne and hold the boy until Stannis arrived? But that would provoke the Lannisters to immediate violence. The City Watch was commanded by Janos Slynt, a man who loved gold more than honor, not a reliable ally. Ned struggled with the decision for hours, pacing the solar. If he did nothing, Stannis would show up with an army. The Lannisters would bar the gates. Thousands might die in the siege. If he tried to facilitate a peaceful transition, the Lannisters might kill him and crown Joffrey anyway. The realm needed a strong hand to orchestrate a bloodless shift, and that meant forging alliances carefully. At last, he decided to confide in Ser Barristan Selmy. The old knight was honorable, had served 3 kings, and was known to be the epitome of chivalry. If anyone in the Kingsguard would stand for the rightful king, it was Barristan the Bold. Ned arranged a discreet meeting in the vault below the Red Keep, where old armor and weaponry were stored. He arrived late at night, wearing a plain gray cloak, no sigils or markings. He waited in the flickering torchlight, among dusty suits of armor that looked like ghostly sentinels. Barristan arrived soon after, alerted by a coded message. His white cloak was the only bright thing in that damp gloom. His voice was soft and careful. "Lord Stark, you asked for secrecy. I am here, though I am uncertain whether I should be. What is this about?" Ned took a breath. "Ser Barristan, I ask you to hear me out, and then judge with your own honor. Will you?" Barristan set his jaw. "I will hear you, my lord. Say your piece." So Ned told him everything. The truth of Joffrey's parentage, discovered by reading the lineage of House Baratheon and from Gendry's existence. Robert's death, cunningly timed for the Lannisters' advantage. Ned told Barristan about the letter from Stannis, that the elder Baratheon was the rightful king, and that he would come soon. He omitted no detail, though he suppressed certain names and the specifics of how he had discovered the bastardy. By the time he finished, Barristan's face was ashen. "It is true, then," Barristan whispered, gripping the hilt of his sword in a trembling fist. "I had suspicions, but I never wanted to see it. The boy does not resemble Robert in the slightest. I told myself such things happen, but the seeds of doubt were there." Ned nodded gravely. "He is not Robert's. My friend died and left no trueborn children. By rights, the throne is Stannis's." Barristan exhaled, a sound heavy with conflict. "The Kingsguard vow is to defend the king, whomever the crown rests upon. We swore to protect the blood of the king. If Joffrey is not that blood, then is my vow to him worthless? Or do I remain loyal to the occupant of the throne, by the law of the land?" His voice wavered, the turmoil plain. "You swore to protect the rightful king, Ser Barristan," Ned said gently. "You are a man of honor. I ask you to stand aside or stand with me when the time comes. For your vow's sake, for the realm's." Barristan was silent a long moment, the torchlight dancing on his silver hair. Then he looked Ned in the eye, tears brimming. "I will not serve treason. If Stannis is the king by blood and by law, then I cannot raise my blade against him. But nor can I openly defy Joffrey yet, not until the time is right. My oath compels me to protect the realm. If the Lannisters discovered my betrayal, they would kill me, and perhaps also your daughters. So you must use caution, Lord Stark." Relief sparked in Ned's chest. Having Barristan's quiet alliance was no small thing. "Thank you, Ser Barristan. I am in your debt." Now, I believe King Stannis arrives in less than a fortnight. We must find a way to prevent bloodshed. Barristan nodded. Perhaps if we can persuade the City Watch to stand down, and the Kingsguard to remain neutral, the Lannisters will have no choice but to yield. Cersei might flee, but that is better than a sack of the city. It was a plan, a faint hope for a bloodless transition. Ned clasped Barristan's hand. We can try. For the realm's sake. They parted ways. Barristan would remain in his post, feigning loyalty, quietly easing the tensions among the Kingsguard. Ned would seek to undermine Janos Slynt's control of the gold cloaks. They had days to accomplish this. A near impossible feat, but duty demanded they try. In that time, Ned also reached out to other possible allies. He had quiet words with the Lord Commander of the City Watch, implying large sums of gold might come from the new king if Slynt swore loyalty at the right moment. He used men of his household to carry bribes and overtures. Peter Baelish caught wind of these secret dealings. He was far too cunning not to notice a shift in the gold cloak loyalty. But Baelish surprised Ned by offering to help. If you want to sway the City Watch, my lord, Peter said one afternoon in Ned's solar, I can provide certain financial inducements, for a modest interest rate, of course. And I would only ask for a small favor in return, once all is said and done. Ned eyed him with suspicion. I do not trust your so-called favors, Lord Baelish. Why do you wish to help me? Baelish shrugged, smiled that thin-lipped smile. Let us say I prefer a realm that remains stable enough for my finances to prosper. A Lannister dictatorship might not suit me if they run short on coin. Besides, I have always had a certain fondness for House Stark. Ned recalled that Cat had once spurned Peter's affections. Long ago. Perhaps the man still nursed old feelings. Or perhaps he was simply cunning, seeing that Stannis might win the day. But if Baelish's gold could secure the City Watch, it might save thousands of lives when Stannis arrived. Ned decided to proceed warily, accepting the offer but promising nothing. Thus, the stage was set. Janos Slynt's men were quietly being offered bribes, all in preparation for a moment when they might stand aside or declare for the rightful king. Barristan worked from within the Kingsguard, ready to ensure they did not risk their lives to defend a false boy king. Meanwhile, Ned feigned deference in the council meetings, letting Cersei believe he was bowing to Joffrey's inevitability. Days slipped by, each sunrise bringing them closer to Stannis' landing. The night before the expected arrival, Ned scarcely slept. He was in a cold sweat, haunted by visions of Lannister soldiers setting the city aflame. He woke at first light, discovered a trembling Sansa in the corridor, tears in her eyes. Father, she whispered, the Queen told me to prepare my wedding gown. She says I will marry Joffrey within a moon's turn. She said if I ever want to see you again, I must not oppose it. Is this true? Am I truly to marry him? Ned's heart twisted at the sight of her fear. He touched her hair gently. My sweet girl, if the Queen has her way, yes, she means to go through with the betrothal. But do not fear. I have plans that may change things, if the gods are good. Sansa's lower lip trembled. Is it about Joffrey's father? I heard you and Mother speak sometimes. I don't understand. Ned took a steadying breath. He did not want to burden her with the entire truth. She was too young, too deeply in the thick of it. All you need to know is that I love you, and I will do what I must to keep you safe. Keep silent, keep your eyes open. If I tell you to run, you do so. Do you understand? She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. Ned kissed her brow. Go, he whispered. Stay by Arya's side. I will send for you soon. She hurried off. Ned watched her retreating figure, sorrow gnawing at him. If the day went ill, Sansa might be lost in the chaos, or wedded to a boy who had no rightful claim to the throne. Or worse, that morning, Ned called what remained of his northern men to him. Tomard, Desmond, and a few others, a small retinue of loyal guards. He gave them quiet instructions. Gather the girls, keep them close, prepare horses near the postern gate if flight became necessary. Then Ned made his way to the throne room, mind racing. A hush hung in the vast hall. Cersei was there, radiant in black and gold mourning garb, Joffrey at her side, sulking but trying to appear regal. The Lannister guards stood in rows, bright crimson cloaks over golden armor. The city watch, in black and gold, lined the edges of the hall. Ned's eyes darted to them, searching for signs that their loyalty might shift, but he found only grim faces, unreadable. Ser Barristan was at the foot of the Iron Throne with the other Kingsguard, all in immaculate white. Littlefinger was there, wearing a mocking half-smile. Varys lurked behind a column, watchful. Cersei beckoned Ned forward. Her voice rang out. "Lord Stark, you have served as protector of the realm, but the time has come to crown the rightful king. Kneel to Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name, or stand accused of treason." The words echoed. A wave of unease passed through the hall. Ned realized that the break must come now or never. If he bent the knee here, he would be acknowledging Joffrey's claim and denying Stannis outright. His gaze flicked to the city watch. He willed them to remain calm. Head held high, Ned spoke clearly. "I served King Robert faithfully. Now Robert's true heir must have the throne." Cersei's face turned deadly pale, and her lips twisted in anger. "Joffrey is Robert's true heir, as all the realm knows, you fool. Do you dare question my son's legitimacy?" A murmur rippled among the onlookers. A shaky hush. Ned swallowed, his heart pounding like a drum. "I do not question it, my queen. I deny it. There is proof that Joffrey Baratheon is not the son of King Robert, but born of incest with your brother." Collective gasp. Joffrey's cheeks flamed red, and his hand jerked toward the hilt of his sword. Cersei let out a hiss of fury. The Lannister guards tensed. The city watch, uncertain, gripped their spears. Ned lifted his voice, pressing on before the queen could strike him down. "By the laws of succession, the crown must pass to King Robert's eldest trueborn brother, Stannis of House Baratheon. He comes even now, with rightful claim and the might of Dragonstone behind him. I urge the city to open its gates peacefully." Shouting erupted through the hall. Some of the gold cloaks shifted, looking to Janos Slynt. Ned saw Slynt's face contort in panic and fury. The man might not keep his end of the bargain. Ned stood alone before the dais, uncertain if his carefully laid plan was about to collapse. Joffrey's voice cracked as he shouted, "Seize him! Kill him! He's a traitor!" Cersei yelled, "Guards, do not hesitate. Arrest Lord Stark. If he resists, cut him down." A wild heartbeat hammered in Ned's ears. He glanced at Ser Barristan. The old knight hesitated, pained. Jaime Lannister was not present, likely off leading some Lannister force. Good. That was one less threat. Then, beyond the array of Lannister guards, Ned caught a glimpse of Peter Baelish, who gave him a single nod. The moment was upon them. Baelish's behind-the-scenes bribery was supposed to ensure the gold cloaks would not stand against Ned. But would it work? Janos Slynt roared, "Gold cloaks, defend the rightful king. Arrest Lord Stark and any who side with him." Some of the watchmen rushed forward, spear tips aimed at Ned. He braced for a fight, but then half of them pivoted, turning their weapons on their own comrades. Cries of confusion rang out as the gold cloaks scattered into two camps, one loyal to Lannister gold, the other swayed by Ned's bribes or Baelish's. Shouts erupted on all sides. Cersei screamed, "Stop them, you fools!" She pushed Joffrey behind her, while the Lannister guards rushed to form a wall of steel around them. Ned drew his sword, heart pounding, though he prayed it would not come to open slaughter. "Command your men to stand down," he yelled at Janos Slynt, whose face was twisted in terror as half his men turned traitor. Barristan Selmy stepped forward, sword in hand, blocking two Lannister guards who lunged for Ned. His face was resolute. "No blood need be shed here," Barristan called. "Queen Cersei, yield the throne to the rightful king, or more lives will be lost. I will not fight for a false king." Those words from the legendary Kingsguard champion struck like thunder. The Lannister men wavered, uncertain if they dared cross swords with Barristan the Bold. But Cersei was beyond reason. "You traitors!" she spat, face twisting with hatred. I'll have every one of you flayed." A swirl of confusion and clashing steel erupted. Lannister guards, outnumbered, fought fiercely. Some of the watchmen who had not been bribed joined them. Barristan parried a blow from a gold cloak who had apparently not switched sides. Ned stepped in, knocked the man's spear aside, and shouted for a surrender. The hall became a battlefield of echoing swords and screams. Peter Baelish disappeared from Ned's line of sight, gone like a wraith. Varys retreated behind a pillar, hands fluttering in feigned distress. Ned advanced on Cersei, keeping his sword low, heart hammering. "Yield," he said. "Do not make me do this." She stared at him with unbridled malice. "Never." Then her eyes flicked toward Joffrey. The boy had his hand on his sword, though he seemed petrified, torn between fleeing and fighting. "Kill him," Cersei shrieked. "Kill them all." A Lannister guard lunged at Ned. He deflected the strike, steel rang on steel, and the man staggered back as Barristan struck him in the side with the flat of his blade. Another guard grabbed Joffrey's arm, trying to pull him back, out of the fray. The City Watch pressed in around them, some loyal to Ned, some loyal to the Lannisters. Blades flashed, cries echoed. Ned's men from the north, posted near the hall's entrance, rushed forward. One was cut down by a Lannister halberd. Ned's blood roared. He fought to disarm, not to kill, but the chaos was overwhelming. A spear grazed Ned's thigh. He bit back a cry and stumbled. Another blow might have ended him, but Barristan knocked the spear aside with lightning reflexes. Desperate to end this madness, Ned mustered all his will and roared at the top of his voice. "Enough! In the name of King Stannis, drop your weapons." Remarkably, some did. The ring of steel fell silent in patches as more gold cloaks, uncertain, obeyed. Lannister guards, seeing themselves outnumbered, eased back warily. Barristan loomed like a towering sentinel, blade shining with torchlight. Ned pivoted, pointing his sword at Joffrey, who had been pulled behind two remaining Lannister guards. The boy's eyes were wild with fear and fury. "Take him," Ned commanded quietly. The bribed gold cloaks pressed in, seizing Joffrey's arms. The boy kicked and screamed, "Unhand me! I am the king!" Cersei rushed forward, but she was seized by two watchmen. She spat and scratched at them, hair falling loose from its gold pins. "You dogs! You traitors!" Ned felt no triumph in that moment, only sorrow. Robert's wife undone. Robert's children, or what he believed were his children, revealed as impostors. This was not the victory he had wanted, but it was the only way to avoid an outright slaughter in the streets. "Take them into custody," Ned said. "No harm is to come to them on my honor. They will answer to the king, Stannis, when he arrives." Some of the watchmen nodded and dragged Joffrey and Cersei away, ignoring their shrieks and curses. Corpses littered the hall, a half-dozen watchmen and Lannister guards. Groans of the wounded rose like a terrible choir. Ned's stomach twisted. He had hoped for fewer losses. Barristan lowered his sword, gaze full of sadness. The hush of aftermath weighed upon them. Slowly, more men bent the knee to Ned, or at least ceased their fighting. Janos Slynt was nowhere to be seen. He had apparently fled. Varys Rema, inned behind his pillar, emerging cautiously, his face pale. Peter Baelish strolled back into view, neat as ever, his expression unreadable. Ned turned to him, wiping sweat from his brow. "You told me you had the City Watch. Half of them turned against me," he said, voice trembling with anger. Baelish gave a shrug. "Half is better than none, my lord. And it achieved what we needed, did it not?" Ned stared, breathing heavily, but he could not argue. Stannis would arrive to find Joffrey and Cersei already taken. The keep was effectively under Ned's control. A small portion of the Lannister guards might still hold other parts of the castle, but they would be quickly overwhelmed now that the watch had mostly swung to Ned's side. Looking around at the bodies on the floor, Ned said hoarsely, "Have the wounded tended to, Lannister or not, and gather the dead. We will see them buried with honor. This matter is ended." But even as he said it, A chill ran through him. Tywin Lannister would not let this stand. War still loomed, and if Stannis was as unyielding as rumor claimed, Cersei and Joffrey might face his wrath on the morrow. Ned gazed at the Iron Throne, that monstrous seat of power. It seemed to glimmer in the torchlight, hungry for more blood. Within a day, Stannis Baratheon's fleet was sighted off the coast. Galleys and warships under the fiery stag banner approached Blackwater Bay. Atop the walls, Ned stood with Barristan and a cadre of watchmen, gazing out at the horizon. The ships were numerous, sails full. The meager royal fleet in the harbor had no will to fight. The Red Keep, now in Ned's tenuous control, was preparing to open its gates. Down in the city, word had spread that Prince Joffrey was exposed as a bastard. Some wept in confusion, others raged at the Lannisters. The Gold Cloaks tried to keep order. Ned had stationed men at critical points to prevent looting or riots. Tywin's forces, rumor said, were in the field near Harrenhal, uncertain whether to march on the city. With Joffrey seized, Tywin might attempt a rescue, but Stannis' arrival was too swift. The tide was with him. Late that afternoon, Stannis' bannermen landed at the city docks, a column of soldiers in Baratheon livery marching toward the Red Keep. Citizens gathered, gawking, uncertain whether to cheer or tremble. Some hailed him as the rightful king. Others whispered fear of a tyrant's approach. Ned waited in the courtyard, flanked by Barristan and a line of watchmen. The gates opened wide, and in rode Stannis Baratheon on a black destrier, his face set in iron. Davos Seaworth was with him, as well as a host of knights. Ned stepped forward, took a knee out of respect for the rightful successor. "Your Grace," he said, voice carrying across the courtyard. "I, Eddard Stark, protector of the realm by King Robert's dying decree, acknowledge you as the lawful king of the Seven Kingdoms. Welcome to King's Landing." Stannis regarded him from atop his horse. His dark eyes bored into Ned, measuring him. Then he dismounted. "You have done what is right, Lord Stark," he said in a voice cold as the wind off the sea. "I received your message. I see you have captured the Lannister woman and the false prince." Ned rose. "Yes, Your Grace. I have them in custody within the Red Keep's dungeons, along with key Lannister loyalists. The throne room is yours." Stannis nodded sharply. His gaze swept the courtyard, taking in the city watch, the battered remnants of the previous day's skirmish, and the ragged condition of the halls. "I have no patience for half measures. If Joffrey is not of my brother's blood, he and his mother shall face judgment. But first, I will claim the throne that is mine by right." Ned swallowed. He might have hoped for a more measured approach, but Stannis was who he was. "Shall I escort you to the throne room?" "Yes." Stannis beckoned to his knights, and they followed in a tight formation. Davos Seaworth approached Ned with a polite inclination of the head. "Lord Stark," he murmured. "Thank you for helping the king come this far without a full-blown war. We owe you gratitude." Ned nodded. "I did what I must, Ser Davos. The realm needs stability, though I fear Tywin Lannister may not yield so easily." Davos looked grim. "We are prepared. Lord Stannis always is." Together, they walked through the Red Keep's corridors. People parted to let them pass. At the doors of the throne room, Ned paused, letting Stannis and his knights move ahead. The heavy doors swung open, revealing the Iron Throne in the gloom. The bodies were gone, but the memory of battle still hung in the air. Stannis strode across the hall, ascended the steps of the Iron Throne, and turned to face those assembled. Barristan Selmy bowed low, silent. A hush filled the chamber, save for the echo of footsteps. "My brother Robert is dead," Stannis declared, his voice loud and clipped. "The boy Joffrey is no son of his. The Lannisters have sought to usurp the throne. By the laws of gods and men, I am king of the Seven Kingdoms." He placed a hand on the spiked armrest, the steel shards of 1,000 swords. "Henceforth, let any who deny my right step forward." Silence reigned. The air felt stifling, full of tension. "Very well," Stannis turned to Davos. "Bring forth the prisoners." Davos gestured to the guards. A moment later, Cersei Lannister was hauled in, chained at the wrists, hair disheveled but still proud in bearing. Joffrey followed, likewise shackled, fury and terror twisting his young face. A hush of shock rippled through the courtiers as they saw the fallen queen and prince. Stannis glared at Cersei. "You conspired to place your bastard upon my brother's throne. For that, the penalty is death." Cersei spat. "You have no right to judge me. You are a humorless wretch, unloved by the realm, overshadowed by your own brother's memory." Her voice reverberated in the hall, brimming with venom. Joffrey tried to speak, but fear choked him. Stannis's face was stone. He raised a hand. "Silence. Your father's armies lurk in the countryside. Do you think I fear them? Let him come. The truth is plain, and the realm will see it. You have lied, forging false heirs. You will stand trial for this treason." Ned stepped forward cautiously, wanting to spare some measure of bloodshed. "Your Grace, as protector of the realm, I took them into custody so that justice might be served. I would humbly suggest that a formal trial be convened, with the great lords invited to witness." Stannis's gaze flicked over Ned, the lines of his mouth tight. "Why should I waste time on a farce of a trial? The evidence is clear enough for me. Justice must be swift, or this realm will not respect me." Ned felt his breath catch. Had he traded one form of tyranny for another? He knew Stannis believed fiercely in law and punishment, but beheading a queen regent and a boy who had believed himself a prince might be too harsh. Yet how to persuade Stannis to yield? Barristan stepped in, voice measured. "Your Grace, if these judgments are carried out without due process, you risk the realm's scorn. Let them stand trial. Let the people see the evidence. That is how to secure legitimacy." Stannis's eyes narrowed, but after a taut moment, he relented. "Very well, they shall have a trial. Let it not be said that I denied them the chance to speak in their defense. But the outcome is certain. If they are found guilty, they will not leave these dungeons with their heads." Cersei hissed, her green eyes smoldering with hate. Joffrey cried, "They'll kill us, mother. We have to." He was cut off by a guard's gauntlet tightening on his shoulder. Cersei said nothing more, glaring at Stannis with a raw, feral defiance. She allowed herself to be dragged out of the throne room, though she spat curses all the way. The watchers parted, some pale with shock, others whispering, exultant or fearful. The drama was palpable. Ned felt no triumph, only a sense of finality. One stage of this dangerous game was over, but the next would begin with Tywin's reaction. By early evening, ravens had flown to every corner of the realm, proclaiming Stannis as king and announcing that Cersei and her children had been found out as traitors. Ned watched those ravens depart from the rookery, heart heavy. War might yet come if Tywin refused to recognize Stannis's claim, or if Renly, somewhere out in the world, decided he deserved the throne more. The realm was a tinderbox. That same night, Stannis summoned Ned to the small council chamber. Davos was there, along with Barristan, a few lords who had accompanied Stannis, and a scattering of Stormland bannermen. The seat at the head of the table was now Stannis's, no longer empty. Ned found it strange to walk in and see that stern figure where once Robert had reclined, swaggering and laughing. Stannis wasted no time on pleasantries. "Lord Stark, you have done the realm a service by exposing the Lannister treachery. I name you once again Hand of the King, to serve me as faithfully as you served my brother, though with fewer oversights, I hope." Ned felt a pang of regret for Robert, but he bowed. "As you will, your Grace. I shall do my duty." Stannis nodded curtly. "Good. Our first matter, Tywin Lannister. His forces are large. He may lay siege if he believes he can take this city. I will not let that happen." Davos cleared his throat. "We have more ships than he does, but he can attack by land. The gold cloaks are with us, but we need to ensure the people do not riot if war breaks out. King's Landing is big, hungry, and easily roused." Ned spoke quietly. If Tywin Lannister is wise, he will see that the city is in your hands and yield. But if he is as proud as we know, he might fight. We should send an envoy to attempt a settlement, at least to avoid bloodshed." Stannis' mouth tightened with distaste, but he gave a short nod. "Do what you must, but I will not cede an inch of my claim. If the Lannisters want war, they shall have it." And so Ned found himself once again in the thick of politics, forging letters to Tywin Lannister, to the River Lords, to the Reach, even to the Vale, summoning them to acknowledge the rightful king and spare themselves the wrath of royal justice. Over the next days, word returned. Some houses professed support, sending envoys or promising to attend King Stannis' coronation. Others hedged, waiting to see which way the wind blew. The North, thanks to Ned's name and the ties of House Stark, sent a measure of loyalty. The Vale was uncertain without Lisa Arryn's cooperation. The Tyrells remained quiet, though Mace Tyrell wrote to congratulate Stannis in lukewarm language. Tywin Lannister, in typical fashion, did not respond at all. Meanwhile, the city reeled. Refugees poured in, fleeing rumored marauders in the countryside. Tensions simmered in Flea Bottom. With Cersei in the dungeons, some demanded she be burned alive as a witch. Others, especially those who had profited from Lannister generosity, grew sullen and resentful. Stannis' men patrolled the streets. A few drunken Stormlanders got into brawls with locals. Ned tried to keep order, to no avail. The day came for the trial of Cersei Lannister and Joffrey Baratheon. It was held in the throne room before a panel of 3 judges: King Stannis, hand of the King Ned Stark, and the aged Grand Maester Pycelle, though Ned did not trust Pycelle fully. The hall filled with onlookers. The realm's lords were still scattered, but enough knights and courtiers attended to make it a grand spectacle. Cersei was brought out, eyes blazing. Joffrey stood beside her, looking pitiful in manacles. Evidence was presented. The lineage from the Great Book of Houses, Gendry's testimony that Robert sired him, the suspicious accounts of Jaime often being near the Queen's chambers, Ned's discovery of the truth. Barristan Selmy bore witness that Robert confided concerns about the children's hair color. One by one, the pieces added up to a damning tapestry. Cersei denounced it all, calling it lies, but the crowd believed her less and less. Pycelle gave some hesitant testimony that indeed, the children did not resemble the Baratheons at all. Joffrey wept and raged, claiming he was Robert's son, calling the trial a sham, but no amount of crying could refute the mountain of evidence. Stannis pronounced the verdict: guilty of treason, guilty of regicide, for it was suspected the wine was tampered with on that boar hunt, though proof was lacking, guilty of incest, sentenced to death. Joffrey howled, tears streaming down his cheeks, as 2 guards seized him. Cersei fixed Stannis with a look of such hatred it seemed she might claw his eyes out if she had the chance. But she only said, "You think you've won? My father will kill you all. Do what you must. I defy you." Stannis gave no mercy. "Take them to the black cells. Their heads shall be struck off tomorrow at dawn." A ripple of shock ran through the hall. Joffrey shrieked, "Mother!" and kicked wildly. Cersei tried to hold him, but the guards tore them apart. The watchers whispered, some in horror, some in grim satisfaction. War or not, the Lannisters were about to lose their figureheads. Ned closed his eyes, wishing there were another way. He believed in justice, but he was no butcher. That night, Ned wrestled with his conscience. Killing a boy, even if he was a bastard, felt monstrous. Yet Joffrey had threatened his daughters, and the boy had commanded Ned's execution not so long ago. The day Ned was seized, back in another life, was fresh in his mind. Joffrey was no innocent, but he was a child manipulated by vile parents. Ned stared at the brazier in his chamber, the coals glowing like dim embers. Dare he beg Stannis for clemency? What good might that do, when Tywin's army still hovered outside the city's knowledge, likely massing for a siege if news reached him that Joffrey faced execution? At last, Ned knew he had to try. He owed Robert that much. If only Robert's friend had tried to spare the boy, but Robert was gone, and it fell to Ned. He rose and dressed, making his way to the king's private chambers. The guards let him pass, and he found Stannis studying maps of the kingdom by candlelight, Davos at his side. Stannis looked up sharply. "Lord Stark? This is late. Speak if you must." Ned bowed his head. "Your Grace, I come regarding Joffrey. I know you have sentenced him and the Queen to die at dawn. I would ask for mercy for the boy. Cersei is guilty beyond doubt, but Joffrey is a child of 12. He is shaped by his mother's lies. Perhaps the Night's Watch could take him, spare his life. Let him live out his days at the Wall, if you must punish him. He has done me great wrong, but I—" Ned's voice trailed off. He could not meet Stannis's cold gaze. Stannis's lips pressed into a thin line. "A child of 12, yes, with the arrogance of a tyrant. I must show the realm that treachery is not suffered. Mercy is not my way, Lord Stark. You know that." Ned's eyes flickered to Davos, silently pleading. Davos cleared his throat. "Your Grace, it may be wise. A show of mercy can earn you respect in the hearts of the people." Stannis turned his steely gaze on Davos. "You would have me spare the boy who sat upon my brother's throne, threatened to kill our dear Lord Stark, and would rule the realm as a Lannister puppet? The boy's father is Jaime Lannister, the man who crippled our laws with incest. No, Davos, this is a rot at the core. It must be cut out." Ned felt a tremor in his hands. "I beg you to think again. My daughters are near his age. When I see Joffrey's face, I cannot help but see a misguided child. There are many in the realm who might prefer to see mercy from a king, rather than another day of bloodshed." Stannis's mouth twitched, the closest thing to a show of emotion Ned had seen in him. Silence reigned for a time, broken only by the crackle of the candle. Finally, Stannis spoke. "Ned Stark, you are a good man, but you are naive. My father would have called you a dreamer. This is the real world, cold and cruel. Joffrey is a symbol of the Lannister treachery. If I spare him, people will whisper that my resolve is weak. Tywin Lannister will believe me soft. That can only lead to more rebellion." Davos tried once more. "Your Grace, what if—" Stannis cut him off with a slash of his hand. "Enough. My decision is made." He turned away, looking at the map. "At dawn, the boy dies, along with his mother. That is the king's justice." Ned felt the finality in those words. A leaden sorrow pressed in on him. He opened his mouth to speak again, but no words came. He bowed stiffly and departed, feeling the helpless weight of the realm's new reality. Stannis would rule with an iron will. He might be just in some respects, but not merciful. And the Lannisters would never forget this day. When dawn broke the next morning, Ned stood on the battlements overlooking a small courtyard where a scaffold had been erected. He could not bear to witness the execution up close, nor could he look away entirely. The crowds were kept back by lines of the city watch. Some onlookers jeered or cheered. Others stood silent. The drum sounded. A hush fell. Joffrey Baratheon, dressed in rags, was led to the block first. He was sobbing, begging for his life. "I'm sorry," he wailed. "Mother, help me." But Cersei was held back by 2 guards, forced to watch. Stannis had named a Stormlands knight as his headsman, a grim man who raised a heavy sword. Joffrey's last scream tore through the morning air, cut short by the blade. Ned felt bile rise in his throat. The boy's head fell into the basket, golden hair matted with blood. The crowd stirred in a mixture of satisfaction and horror. Next came Cersei, resolute to the end, cursing Stannis until the blade silenced her forever. The heads were displayed briefly, proof of the new king's justice. Then the watchers began to file away. Ned wanted to turn his gaze from the grisly scene, but for a moment, he could only stare at the red pool seeping across the scaffold. This was the cost of the Game of Thrones. As the day wore on, word of Joffrey and Cersei's execution spread throughout King's Landing and beyond. Fear wrapped itself around the hearts of the populace. Stannis was king, the Lannisters were declared traitors, and Tywin's reaction remained the great unknown. Messengers came in with reports that Lannister bannermen were burning the riverlands. War had begun. Still, Ned Stark walked the corridors of the Red Keep, reminding himself of what he had done and why. A bastard boy had been kept from stealing the throne. Justice was served, though it had come with tragedy. Sansa and Arya were safe, if shaken by the brutal events. The Iron Throne now held the rightful Baratheon king. In time, perhaps, the realm would heal. But the war was only beginning, and many would die in the struggle to come. Standing once more by that narrow window in his solar, Ned gazed at the city. He thought of Robert, of the promise he had once made to protect the realm from madness. Stannis Baratheon was no perfect king, but he was at least lawfully seated, if rigid and grim. The Seven Kingdoms would bow or break. For House Stark, there was no turning back. Ned whispered to the wind, "You were right, Robert. The crown is a heavy thing. May the gods forgive us all." And in that moment, as the sunlight gilded the rooftops of King's Landing, Ned Stark steeled himself for the winter yet to come, the long war for the realm's future. He had chosen to back Stannis Baratheon from the shadows, and now there was no place left for shadows to hide. All would be decided in the storms to follow, in the clash of steel and the forging of alliances. Honor had demanded he act. He had done so, and the consequences would reverberate through the Seven Kingdoms like thunder in a darkened sky. Ned Stark left the battlements at dawn with the din of the execution still pounding in his skull. The watchers on the walls dispersed into the Red Keep's corridors, each wearing some version of shock, grim satisfaction, or uncertain dismay. King Stannis Baratheon had shown the realm exactly how far he was willing to go in dispensing justice. Joffrey's severed head and Cersei's lifeless body were hardly cold upon the scaffold. Yet word was spreading across the city in a low, urgent buzz. They were gone. Two of House Lannister's brightest flames, extinguished beneath the king's steel. Ned walked stiffly, ignoring the guard who saluted him as he passed through the arched doorway leading into the keep. He felt the weight of his new office, the hand of the king, more acutely than ever. Once, he had been Robert's friend, a reluctant counselor who found himself at odds with the cunning webs of King's Landing. Now he was the right hand of Stannis Baratheon, a cold and relentless man whose sense of justice was beyond doubt, but whose mercy, if it existed at all, was buried under iron. Ned had called for a more tempered approach to the punishment of Joffrey, to no avail. The memory of that boy's final screams as the headsman's sword descended would haunt him for the rest of his days. He paused in a quiet alcove, pressing his hand against the stone wall to steady himself. A swirl of fierce regrets coursed through him. Regrets that Robert had died before he could set right the inheritance. Regrets that events had propelled them all to this point. Regrets that a child's life, guilty though the boy was in many ways, had ended under the blade. But Ned Stark's was the duty to shoulder burdens. He reminded himself that a war might yet come, and the realm needed him steady, not paralyzed. He exhaled raggedly, pushing away from the wall. Through a slit of a window nearby, he glimpsed a corner of the courtyard. The scaffold was empty now, the bodies carried away. The wood, stained red, remained a dire reminder of the new king's rule. Down the corridor he went, ignoring the hush of courtiers stepping aside. Some gave him respectful nods. Others eyed him with veiled apprehension. He felt them watching, measuring how much of Stannis's flinty justice resided in Ned Stark as well. The Red Keep was a nest of rumors, every man eager to guess which way the wind blew, which way the new king's wrath might fall. He made for the Tower of the Hand, anxious to speak to his daughters. They would have heard of the executions by now. Upon reaching his chamber, he found Arya perched on a window seat, scowling at the city sprawling below. She turned sharply at his entrance, her gray eyes angry and afraid. "Is it true?" she demanded without preamble. "They chopped off Joffrey's head at dawn? Some men said he squealed like a pig." Ned winced at her bluntness. She was so young, yet the city had forced her to stare at savage truths. "He was executed for treason," he said softly. "The king ordered it. It was done quickly." Arya's brow furrowed. "I know he was cruel and a liar, but it feels wrong all the same. Sansa's in her room, crying. She's frightened. She's saying that if King Stannis orders it, maybe we'll all be beheaded next. Father, what will happen to us now? Ned moved to his daughter and rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. He sensed the taut quiver of her muscles, the tension of a child forced to grapple with grown men's wars. You need not fear. Stannis is not our enemy. I have done nothing but serve the throne's rightful claim. You are both safer now than you were under the Lannisters' hands. Arya lowered her gaze, unconvinced. She gazed at the dagger at her belt, a slender blade she had insisted on wearing since the day men of the gold cloaks tried to seize her in the chaos before Joffrey's arrest. It doesn't feel safer, she said. I miss home, Winterfell. I miss the quiet and the yard, and Septa Mordane's lessons I used to hate. I wish we'd never come to King's Landing. Ned's throat constricted. If only he could roll back the turning of seasons. But the realm had needed him here once Robert fell ill, and now it needed him just as dearly. I know, he said, voice thick. I'll find a way to send you and Sansa north, soon as I can be sure the roads are secure. The war might spread if the Lannisters do not yield. Arya nodded. Her eyes flickered with a mixture of relief and rebellious longing. I want to be back in the north. I hate it here. Then her face fell again. But Sansa, she's a mess, father. She keeps crying into her pillows. She can't believe Joffrey's really dead, even though she hated him in the end. Ned closed his eyes briefly. Sansa had once woven fairy tale dreams about Joffrey. Even after she discovered his cruelty, some part of her had remained enthralled by the idea of a perfect, gallant prince. Seeing him undone under the headsman's sword must have been a terrible shock. I'll speak with her, Ned said. Stay here or, better yet, go practice your footwork in the yard with Syrio, if he's still about. Arya nodded, though her eyes were red-rimmed with unshed tears. She slid off the window seat and hurried past him, out into the corridor, her footfalls echoing. Ned took a moment to draw a slow breath. He thought of how many times he had repeated the words "winter is coming" in his life, never suspecting that winter would take the form of savage politics in King's Landing. Then he went to Sansa's room. He found her lying face down on the bed, shoulders trembling, hair splayed across the coverlet. She wore a thin white dress, crumpled from a sleepless night. At his quiet knock, she turned her head, eyes puffy. "Father," she croaked, her voice raw. "They killed him." Ned moved closer, sinking onto the bed's edge. "Yes," he said gently. "I am sorry for it. I know you once cared for him, but he was not who you thought." He was horrible," Sansa blurted. "He made me afraid. He ordered your head once. He threatened Arya. He was monstrous, I know that. Still, I remember him smiling at me at the tourney or praising my hair." She gave a choked sob. "I don't know how to feel. I don't know what's right or wrong anymore." Ned stroked her hair, feeling an ache in his chest. "Sometimes justice can be cruel, even if it must be done. I tried to show King Stannis that mercy might be better for the boy, but he would not listen. Stannis believes strongly in law and punishment. It's over now, Sansa." She sniffed. "I know. And Mother? And Robb? Does Robb know what happened?" "Ravens have flown," Ned said. "Robb will learn of it soon. He's in Winterfell, and I've asked him to remain vigilant. The roads are dangerous, and I fear Tywin Lannister will want vengeance." Sansa curled into herself. "Can't we go home soon?" "Soon," he promised again, though the vow weighed heavily on his heart. "We must wait until I'm certain it's safe. There may be battles. There's more to come, I fear." She nodded, tears drying. "I'll wait, Father." He patted her shoulder, stood, and made for the door. But Sansa's voice followed softly. "I'm sorry for all the fuss I made when I wanted Joffrey. I was such a silly girl. I thought I was living in one of those songs, but it's all just cruelty, isn't it?" Ned turned back. His eyes glimmered with paternal sorrow. "Not all, my sweet girl. There's still kindness in this world, but you must have sharp eyes to see it here. Rest now." He left her, his thoughts weighed down by heartbreak for both his daughters, for the brutality they had witnessed that morning. Yet the realm itself offered no time to mourn. Outside that room, the corridors were humming with fresh tidings. Some men reported new movements of Lannister forces in the Riverlands, others worried about House Tyrell's uncertain stance, while some whispered of Renly Baratheon, last seen departing the city in the dead of night. There was no shortage of upheavals in the wake of the Iron Throne's change of hands. Ned had no appetite, but he forced himself to the small council chamber for a midday meeting. King Stannis was there, seated at the head of the table, posture rigid with authority. The big table had fewer occupants than it had under Robert's rule. Lord Baelish Peter sat at one end, wearing a reserved but unreadable half-smile. Grand Maester Pycelle was there, wringing his hands in a display of unease. Ser Davos Seaworth stood behind Stannis's chair, a humble but watchful presence. Lord Renly's seat was conspicuously empty, as he'd vanished from court, presumably to gather Stormland forces or attempt something on his own. Varys was also absent, though that was no surprise. He often drifted in at odd intervals or lingered behind pillars. Ned sank onto his chair, nodding once at Davos in greeting. Stannis wasted no time. "Lord Hand," he said curtly, "you are aware that Tywin Lannister has massed an army in the Riverlands near Harrenhal. Intelligence suggests he's got 20,000 men, possibly more." Ned met the king's stare. "I've heard, and I suspect it will only grow if the Westerlands muster their full strength." Stannis rapped his knuckles on the table. "He may attempt to strike at the capital. Our walls are stout, but the city is large, and the populace is prone to unrest. If Tywin means to lay siege, we must be prepared. The realm must see I am not to be trifled with." Baelish smoothed the lace at his cuffs. "Your Grace, the city's defenders are more numerous since Lord Stark arranged those bribes, and half the gold cloaks declared for you. The other half are likewise under your command now, but their loyalty may hinge on pay. We should ensure they remain well-fed and well-paid, lest they shift allegiances in the night." Stannis gave a dismissive nod. "We have enough gold for that, I trust, Lord Baelish?" Peter grinned faintly. "For now. But if we are locked in a protracted war, coin will be bled as surely as men. The crown's debts were staggering under King Robert. They have not vanished overnight." Ned stirred at that, remembering how Robert had borrowed lavishly and left a treasury nearly bankrupt. "Your Grace," he said, addressing Stannis, "we must weigh the cost of an open war in the Riverlands. The small folk there have already suffered from the mountain raids. We should attempt a parley first. Tywin is proud, but if we offer him terms, perhaps he will recall his armies." Stannis's face was like stone. "The man's daughter and bastard grandson are dead by my order. What terms would he accept short of my own head on a spike? No, Lord Stark. A parley will accomplish nothing but to reveal any hint of weakness. I mean to march. The realm will see that I do not hide behind the city walls." A heavy silence fell. Pycelle coughed, tugging fretfully at his beard. "Your Grace, if I might humbly suggest, House Tyrell could prove vital. They hold the manpower and harvests of the Reach. If they side with you, Tywin's forces will be caught between two large armies." Stannis glowered. The Tyrells turned cloak in the last war, deserting the Targaryens only when the outcome was certain. They are capable of sly maneuvers. Still, it is a valid point. I have no love for Mace Tyrell, but I have dispatched envoys to Highgarden. We shall see if they prefer to bend the knee or test my wrath. Ned understood well that if the Tyrells joined Stannis, it would hem in the Lannisters from the south. Yet Mace Tyrell was known for vanity, and he might hold out for offers of marriage or new titles. The memory of how quickly the Tyrells had changed allegiance in Robert's rebellion reminded Ned that they might do the same now, but only if they believed Stannis certain to win. He said quietly, "They will want a strong sign of your power, Your Grace. If they see your armies on the march and Tywin falter, they may come." Stannis made a curt sound of agreement. "Indeed, Baelish, see that the gold cloaks are well supplied. Pycelle, continue your raven sending to the major lords, ensuring they understand the cost of treason. Lord Stark, I leave the management of the city to you. Davos will handle the ships. I intend to be on the march within a fortnight, earlier if we can muster the men. The war we hoped to avoid is upon us." He stood, the meeting evidently at an end. Ned and the others rose, bowing as Stannis swept from the chamber, Davos at his heels. The hush that followed was almost suffocating. Then Baelish gave Ned a mildly amused look. "Your king is not one for subtleties, my lord. I hope you're prepared for a summer's worth of bloodshed." Ned frowned. "No one wants that, Lord Baelish, but we do what must be done." Peter spread his hands, as if to absolve himself. "I've no quarrel with that. Only let us hope we can keep the city from cannibalizing itself when the army marches off. Soldiers are known to do ill deeds when gold is scarce." Ned turned away, not trusting himself to answer. The cynicism grated on his nerves, though he couldn't deny the ring of truth. If the war dragged on, the city would starve, and roving bands of sellswords might sow chaos. King's Landing was a tinderbox, one spark away from devouring itself in flames. He parted ways with Baelish, ascending the steps to the rooftop gardens in search of open air. The gardens felt heavy with the heat of midday, though a slight breeze off Blackwater Bay ruffled the hedges. A few lords and ladies whispered behind columns of trimmed topiary, but none approached Ned. He paced alone, thinking over the king's decision. Marching against Tywin so soon meant leaving a garrison behind to hold the city. It meant thousands of men traipsing through the riverlands, which had already suffered from Gregor Clegane's depredations. It meant more blood. Would it truly force the Lannisters to kneel, or only inflame Tywin to new heights of fury? Would House Lannister fracture under the blow, or rally around its gold? Ned couldn't say. He only knew that Stannis would not yield, that he would not accept half measures. When he came down from the gardens, he found a steward waiting with a message. A raven had arrived from Winterfell. Ned all but snatched the parchment from the man's hand, wanting word from his eldest son. He dismissed the steward and broke the seal of the direwolf. "Father," it read in Robb's familiar script, "I write with news. The men of the north are stirred by the tidings from King's Landing, that Joffrey has been exposed and executed, and King Stannis now sits the throne. Our banners wonder if war beckons. We have had word from the Riverlands that Tywin Lannister harasses Lord Hoster Tully's forces. Catelyn is here with me, beside Brandon's tomb, and we speak daily of what should be done. We stand ready to answer any call to arms. The North will march if you command it. Yet Mother worries for your safety, and for my sisters. If it be your will, I can take a host south and put an end to Lannister aggression. Or I can remain here and fortify the North. Command me, Father. Your son, Robb Stark." Ned felt pride and sorrow at once. Robb had grown swiftly into a young leader, barely more than a boy when Ned left him. Now he stood on the precipice of war, waiting for a father's word. He knew Stannis would want the full might of the North behind him. The memory of Robert's rebellion flickered in Ned's mind. The bloody battles, the families sundered. But the decision was near inevitable. Tywin Lannister was not the sort to negotiate after losing 2 of his grandchildren and a daughter to the executioner's blade. He would come, and they needed every sword. Late in the day, Ned found time in his solar to pen a reply. He wrote that he was proud of Robb's readiness. If the worst came, Ned might call him south. But he also wanted Robb to maintain strong defenses in the north, for who could say if the Iron Islands or other opportunists might strike once the realm plunged into chaos. He ended with fatherly advice, to trust in Catelyn's wisdom, to keep the lords loyal, and to do no rash deed. The letter felt both too long and too short. So many words left unsaid, so many dangers looming. Still, he sealed it, rang for a steward, and ordered it sent by Raven to Winterfell immediately. In the following days, the city clung to a precarious calm. The small folk ventured out to gather water and fish, uncertain whether new violence might erupt. Shops and stalls reopened, albeit with fewer luxuries than before. Prices for bread and meat began to creep upward, fueled by rumors that war was certain. Stannis, true to his word, set about gathering an army. Many men from the Stormlands flocked to his banner, drawn to the new king's strict sense of justice. A small cadre of lords from the Crownlands remained loyal to him as well, though Ned knew that some served out of fear or cynicism. They established camp outside the city walls, pavilions and banners cropping up on the fields to the south. Within a week, the dusty roads were choked with armed companies. Knights bearing sigils of lesser Stormland houses arrived by the day. Drills took place in the open fields, the clang of steel echoing across the bay. Stannis had cavalry, infantry, siege engines, and a navy anchored offshore. Yet, for all the bustle, there was no joy in these preparations, only the grim acceptance of an inevitable clash. The prospect of a swift siege on Harrenhal or a meeting in open battle with Tywin's host weighed on them all. Ned spent his days dividing attention between the administration of the city, ensuring the Gold Cloaks kept the peace, settling small matters of law in the king's name, and the war councils. At night, he would sometimes find his daughters, sharing a meager meal or speaking of simpler times. Sansa was timid, half in shock, but she brightened slightly whenever talk turned to the possibility of returning north. Arya took her training with the Braavosi water dancer, Syrio Farrell, more seriously than ever, as if forging a shield in her own spirit. One evening, as Ned trudged back from yet another council with Stannis, he found Ser Barristan Selmy waiting outside his solar. The white cloak of the King's Guard glowed faintly in the torchlight, and his face was grim. "Lord Stark," Barristan greeted him quietly. "May we speak?" "Of course." Ned opened the door and let Barristan in. They settled at a small table, the direwolf banner behind them. Ned noticed Barristan's eyes were shadowed with fatigue. "You seem troubled," Ned said. "What is it?" Barristan ran a hand over his silver hair. "I fear for the realm, my lord. King Stannis is rightful, and I stand by him as I must. Yet his severity troubles me. The city is uneasy, the lords are uneasy, and I sense that the king sees only enemies or traitors at every turn. I served 3 kings before him. Each had their vices. Robert drank and hunted whores, Aerys was mad with paranoia, and now Stannis. He is a good man in some respects, but unbending, harsh. If we come to a pitched battle, how many corpses will line the roads?" Ned nodded, a knot of weariness tightening in his chest. "I share your concern. I tried to warn him not to execute the boy. He would not bend. War is upon us, Ser Barristan. I can only hope it ends swiftly, with as little bloodshed as can be managed." Barristan's lined face pulled into a deeper frown. "There is one more matter. Tywin Lannister's second son, Tyrion. Some say he's in the Vale, a prisoner of Lady Lisa Arryn, while others claim he's escaped. If he returns to Tywin's side, that might rally the Westerlands. Tyrion is cunning, as I hear it, and Jaime Lannister is at large, rumored to be riding with his father's host. They'll be looking to avenge the death of their kin. We must be prepared for them." Ned remembered the day he confronted Jaime on the street of King's Landing, after Tyrion's capture in the books he had once read. That was a different time, yet the memory chilled him. Jaime was a formidable foe with a monstrous skill at arms. If Jaime leads Tywin's vanguard, it will be a savage blow indeed. "Thank you for bringing this to me, Ser Barristan. We must remain vigilant." The old knight rose. "I stand at the king's side, but should his commands ever cross the boundaries of honor, I will stand by what is right. I hope you know that, Lord Stark." Ned inclined his head. "I do. Your loyalty to the realm is beyond question." When Barristan departed, Ned sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. He felt the invisible cords pulling at every corner of the realm, a net of alliances and grudges that was about to tighten. Rumors swirled that Mace Tyrell was stalling any overtures from Stannis, wanting to see if Tywin would falter or if Renly might present a better match for his daughter Margaery. The Vale was closed off by Lisa Arryn's insular fears, though House Royce and other Vale lords might be eager to join a war if called. The Riverlands were reeling beneath Tywin's looming threat, while the North had yet to march, awaiting Ned's summons. And far away, another rumor whispered of a Targaryen girl across the sea, though that felt as distant as a fable. He forced himself to rest, if not to sleep, Each day that dawned brought them closer to the king's departure. Stannis would lead the main host, leaving a smaller force to defend King's Landing under the command of a newly appointed castellan. That, Ned realized with mounting apprehension, might be him, Stannis's hand. Yet when the day came to finalize the command structure, Stannis surprised Ned by beckoning him to the yard, where the troops were mustering. "I will have you ride with me, Lord Stark," Stannis announced, standing near his black destrier. "I've chosen Lord Montfort Valerion to stand as castellan and keep the peace. We march for the Riverlands. If the Lannisters challenge our approach, we meet them in battle. If they retreat, we press on to Harrenhal." Ned's heart thudded. He had expected to remain behind, but Stannis apparently wanted the hand at his side, doubtless to show a united front. "As you command, Your Grace." "My daughters." Stannis silenced him with a slight motion of his gauntlet hand. "They will remain here under guard. No harm will come to them. You have my word. If this war is won swiftly, you can send for them to return north. If it drags on, we'll see. But I want your counsel on the field. You served my brother well in his rebellion. That knowledge will be needed again." Ned lowered his gaze, nodding. "Very well, Your Grace." The thought of leaving Sansa and Arya in this city churned his gut. Yet his oath bound him to the king's service. The realm needed swift action. If the Lannisters saw them balk or bicker, it would only embolden Tywin. And if Ned refused, Stannis might interpret it as a slight or a lack of faith. That evening, Ned summoned his daughters and told them. Sansa gasped and looked near tears. Arya scowled, fists clenched. "You're leaving us in this wretched place?" she demanded. "I must," Ned said, quiet but firm. "The king will not relent, and if I left you in the war camp, you'd be no safer. The city is well provisioned, and I'll see that you're guarded day and night. Lord Montfort Valerion is no friend to the Lannisters. He'll keep the Red Keep secure, with Barristan Selmy also remaining to command the Kingsguard. No harm will come to you." Arya's eyes glistened. "I hate it, but if you say it must be." She bit her lip. "Take me with you to the war camp. I can fight. Syrio says I have quick feet." Ned felt a pang of sorrow for how badly she wanted to escape King's Landing. "Not yet, child. Wait here. Practice your forms. Listen to Syrio and to your septa. Look after your sister, too." Arya huffed, but accepted it. Sansa simply hung her head, murmuring something about how she would do her duty. Ned embraced them both, wishing he could protect them from every cruelty to come. He only prayed that if Tywin Lannister somehow marched on the city, Valerion and the Gold Cloaks would hold. Stannis' vow was iron, but events on the battlefield sometimes turned in unexpected ways. At sunrise the next day, horns sounded in the streets, and the king's host began to assemble. Thousands of men in Baratheon colors, black, gold, and red flames, formed up along the roads. Knights with shining helms, crossbowmen in battered leather, foot soldiers with lances on their shoulders. Sellswords, too, some newly hired at Baelish's urging. The king's warhorses stomped the ground, steaming in the early light. Wagons rumbled, loaded with provisions. On the ramparts, small folk gathered to watch, uncertain if they should cheer or huddle in dread. Ned, wearing brigandine over a gray tunic, took up his position near the king. Davos Seaworth rode behind them, along with a cadre of Stormland lords, Bryce Caron, Guyard Morrigan, and others. The royal standard of the Flaming Stag fluttered in the morning breeze. Drums pounded, and the column lurched forward, out the city gates, along the King's Road. Ned had a final glimpse of the Red Keep's walls as they receded, thinking of his daughters behind them. Then the press of men and horses swallowed his view. They made slow progress at first. The King's Road was choked with supply carts, animals, men-at-arms, and camp followers, women selling food or offering other services. Stannis had insisted on discipline, but even the sternest king could not fully tame an army on the move. Ned rode in silence, occasionally exchanging a few words with Davos or with Stannis himself. The king seemed preoccupied, jaw set, eyes fixed on the horizon as if already seeing the battlefield. On the second day, they reached a broad plain. Clusters of peasants emerged from small hovels, gaping at the passing host. Some whispered blessings for the king, others spat curses. Ned heard from outriders that Tywin's forces had indeed begun to move north of Harrenhal, forcing local lords like the Freys and the Vancess to fortify their positions. War was creeping toward them like a hungry tide. That night, the army made camp near a shallow stream. Tents sprang up in orderly rows. Stannis insisted on strict discipline, though it did not stop the occasional drunken fight. Ned joined the king for supper in a large green and gold pavilion commandeered from some Stormland banner. A brazier glowed in the center, the warmth a welcome comfort as darkness settled. Stannis ate little. He drank watered wine and stared at maps spread on a wooden table. Davos hovered over his shoulder, quietly offering counsel. Several lords in the tent spoke in hushed tones, the air thick with tension. Ned approached. Stannis pointed at Harrenhal's stylized outline on the map. Tywin is here or near enough. Some of his outriders have been spotted to the west. The best approach might be to circle south and west, cutting off his supply lines. But that will prolong the campaign. Ned peered at the parchment. If we move directly on Harrenhal, we may risk Tywin's intercept. He has more cavalry than we do. A direct confrontation might be bloody. Stannis nodded grimly. At times, a bloody confrontation is the swifter path. If we can smash him in one pitched battle, the rest of the Westerlands might collapse. I will not shy from it. Davos cleared his throat. Your Grace, the men might welcome a chance to strike quickly, but Harrenhal is formidable. We also hear that Jaime Lannister rides with his father's army, leading a seasoned vanguard. They might not crumble so easily. Stannis regarded Davos with a hard stare. I do not assume it will be easy, Onion Knight, yet I will have victory. The day I fear a Lannister host is the day I should lay down my crown. He turned to Ned. You know Harrenhal's secrets, do you not? You served at the end of Robert's rebellion, though I recall you were sent to lift the siege at Storm's End. Still, have you ever taken Harrenhal? Ned shook his head. I passed it, but we never faced it in open assault. Harrenhal is cursed, some say. Its walls are monstrous, but it's said to be too large to hold effectively. Tywin might use it as a base of operations, or he might move out to meet us in open field. He's cunning, Your Grace. He will want to pick the ground most advantageous to him. A slight sneer tugged at Stannis's lips. Then let him pick it. My men will stand. We hold the crown, we hold the right. It is the Lannisters who cling to scraps of pride. I'll see them kneel or I'll see them die. Ned felt the swirl of warlust in the tent, radiating from Stannis. He prayed it would not drive them to ruin. Part of him recalled how Robert used to speak bravely of battles, yet Robert had also laughed in the face of fear. Stannis was different, grim and unwavering. That might be enough to break Tywin's power, or it might break all of them in the attempt. As the night deepened, Ned returned to his own tent. He unbuckled his sword belt, the old ache in his knees flaring from a long day's ride. Sleep eluded him for hours, and when he dreamed of a great boar with golden eyes rampaging through a forest of withered weirwoods, its tusks gore-stained and a crown of twisted horns upon its head. They pressed on over the next several days, forging northward along roads that grew increasingly ragged. Fields lay burned and ruined, evidence of the skirmishes that had plagued the riverlands. Streams were clogged with rotting vegetation. More than once they passed a scorched village. The sight made Ned's jaw clench. At one such place, he dismounted to walk among the burned huts. He found corpses of peasants and livestock left to decay. No sign of life but crows perched on rafters, cawing. Stannis himself came riding up behind Ned, grim-faced. The mountains work, no doubt, he said. Gregor Clegane, Tywin's rabid dog. He's been terrorizing these lands for weeks. Ned's anger flared. I offered Robert my counsel to punish Gregor once before. We failed then, and this is the price. He kicked a broken piece of charred timber. The small folk always pay. Stannis regarded the ruin with cool disgust. And so they shall until Tywin is broken. Mount up, Lord Stark. We ride. They pressed onward. Scouts came and went with dire rumors. Jaime Lannister was indeed with Tywin's host, rumored to be urging a quick, decisive strike. Another rumor claimed the phrase had sealed the twins to any Baratheon supporters, though none had confirmed it. They spoke, too, of the River Lords. Hoster Tully was gravely ill, Edmure Tully in command. Would the Tullys ride out to meet Stannis, or stand behind their walls? Ned prayed that Edmure would see the sense in uniting behind the crown. The Tullys were kin to Ned through Catelyn, and if they hesitated, the Riverlands would remain a battleground. At last, after near 2 weeks on the road, the royal army halted beside a broad, rolling plain not far from the God's Eye, the great lake that shimmered to the west. Word spread through the camp that Tywin Lannister's forward scouts had been sighted at a distance. The King's War Council convened that evening, the men gathering in a large candlelit pavilion. The tension was palpable. Even the horses seemed skittish in the drifting smoke of torches. Stannis stood with his hands flat on the map-laden table. Ned, Davos, Lord Caron, Lord Valerion's emissary, and various Stormland knights circled around. The king glanced at each face in turn. Tywin Lannister is near. Our outriders engaged a small force at dusk. They retreated north, toward Harrenhal. My guess is that Tywin will pull back to a defensive line near the castle and attempt to bait us. Jaime Lannister leads the vanguard, which is said to be strong in cavalry. Lord Caron frowned. If we try to lay siege to Harrenhal, we might give Tywin the advantage. Better to draw him out. But how? Stannis snorted. We march straight for Harrenhal's approach, stand between him and his supply lines, and force him to come to us. If he remains behind those walls, we starve him out. If he comes forth, we smash him in open battle. Ned studied the map. He could see how it might unfold. Harrenhal's monstrous towers loomed near the north shore of the God's Eye. A wide expanse of grassland and rolling hills stretched east. If they pressed close, they might block the roads leading away, forcing Tywin to either sally forth or wither behind the black walls. But Tywin was cunning, he might slip away. Your Grace, Ned ventured. If you mean to force a confrontation, you must guard your flanks. Tywin could dispatch Jaime's cavalry to strike our rear if we commit ourselves fully to the castle. Perhaps we should position some portion of the army in reserve. Stannis nodded curtly. Agreed. You shall oversee that position, Lord Stark, with a strong force of foot. Lord Caron, you will hold the left flank. I will command the center. Davos will manage our supplies and coordinate with our outriders. We move at first light. If the Lannisters attempt a night raid, we shall meet them in the darkness. There was little else to say. The war council broke, each man returning to his men, issuing commands, checking arms and armor. Ned walked through the camp as men hammered at weapons, polished shields, strung bows. The hush of fear and excitement ran through every row of tents. They were close to a battle that might decide the fate of the Iron Throne for a generation. Ned found no relish in it, only a tired dread. Yet he donned his mail, checked his sword, and prayed to the old gods for strength and guidance. At dawn, the horns sounded, and the king's host advanced across the plain. Ned commanded a contingent of about 4,000 foot soldiers, plus a smattering of cavalry. Stannis's main body, nearly 8,000 strong, marched in the center, the Black Stag banner prominent in the front lines. Lord Caron's men veered left, near a series of low hills. Archers trotted behind them, awaiting orders. The morning sun was bright, revealing the distant silhouette of Harrenhal's twisted towers rising like black talons against the sky. No Lannister banners appeared at first. The land stretched out, empty except for the crows swirling above clusters of burned farms. The hush was eerie. Then, just before midday, came a cry from the outriders. Columns of dust on the horizon. Through his far eyes, one scout glimpsed crimson and gold banners. The Lannisters were forming up. Word rippled through the ranks. Tywin intended to meet them on the field, or at least test their lines. The men tensed, gripping spears and shields. Stannis rode up and down the lines, shouting encouragement. Ned's heart pounded as he arranged his portion of the army. "Shields forward," he called to the foot soldiers. "Pikes at the ready. Archers, stand behind the ranks. Wait for the signal." His captains relayed the orders along the line. They formed a bristling row of spears, with small pockets of cavalry interspersed. Dust rose around them, the smell of sweat and leather thick in the warm air. At length the Lannisters appeared. A broad swath of mounted knights in front, footmen behind, their proud lion banner snapping in the breeze. Jaime Lannister, resplendent in gilded armor, was visible at their head. Ned recalled the man's graceful, deadly skill with a sword. His own hand tightened around the hilt of ice, though the sword was half again too large to wield from horseback. He had chosen a more practical longsword for the coming fight, leaving ice sheathed in his tent as a symbol. The Lannister lines halted out of arrow range. A standard-bearer rode forward, brandishing the lion banner. For an instant, Ned thought they might attempt parley. Then horns blew from the Lannister side, and the cavalry surged, aiming to test the left flank. Cries erupted as the thundering charge of knights in gold and crimson cloaks crashed into a row of Baratheon men. Ned could only watch from a distance, jaw tight. Karen's forces braced, their spears angled. Horses screamed, men bellowed, steel clashed, dust billowed. Through the haze, Ned saw flashes of gold on the Lannister surcoats, the bright swirl of black and red flames on the defenders. Stannis bellowed an order for a countercharge on the left, sending a wedge of mounted Stormlander knights smashing into the Lannister flank. The ring of swords carried across the field. Ned's line held position, waiting for the possibility of an attack on the right or center. He signaled to his archers, some of whom moved to get a clearer shot, but the battle on the left was close and chaotic. Firing arrows risked hitting their own men, so they waited. The ground seemed to tremble beneath Ned's feet from the ferocity of the mounted clash. Karen's men fought bravely, but the Lannister knights were famed for discipline. Then a fresh cluster of cavalry parted from the Lannister center, galloping toward Ned's line. The time for waiting was over. Ned raised his sword. "Spears! Brace! Archers ready!" he roared. His men hurried to form a shield wall, the pike tips angled forward. The archers stood just behind. Arrows knocked. The thunder of hooves grew. Ned waited until the riders were within range. "Loose!" he cried. A volley of arrows whistled through the air, descending on the charging cavalry. Horses screamed and bucked. Men toppled, some skewered, others only wounded. But the line of cavalry pressed on, smashing into Ned's left wing. The pikes took a grim toll, skewering mount and man alike, but some knights broke through the spear wall, hacking and slashing among the foot soldiers. Screams rose. Ned strode forward into the melee, shield lifted, sword in hand. A Lannister knight on a wounded horse swung at him, blade whistling. Ned raised his shield, the impact jarring his entire arm. He pivoted, bringing his long sword up under the knight's guard, catching him just beneath the gilded breastplate. The knight let out a choked cry and toppled sideways. Ned pressed on, trying to hold the line, shouting for the men to close ranks. Everywhere was chaos. The clang of steel, the stench of blood and sweat, the panicked shriek of dying horses. He spotted an enemy banner to the right, golden lion on red, partially splattered with mud. More knights threatened to outflank them. Ned bellowed to one of his captains, pointing. Archers shifted and released another volley. The Lannister knights reeled as arrows peppered their mounts. Some turned back. Others kept coming. In the distance, the king's center advanced behind Stannis's banner. The field devolved into a swirl of sub-battles. Lines fractured. Men locked in vicious combat. Jaime Lannister was glimpsed near the middle, gold armor flashing, cutting down foes like wheat. Ned forced himself to remain calm, to keep his men together. If they lost formation, cavalry would cut them to pieces. Slowly, methodically, the Baratheon foot soldiers advanced, pushing back the Lannister knights who remained on that flank. Bodies littered the ground, horses shrieking. Ned's arm burned from exertion, but he pressed on, stepping over corpses. He glimpsed one of his men from the north, a sworn retainer, lying motionless with an arrow in his throat. The sight made Ned's chest tighten with grief and fury. After what felt like hours, the dust began to settle. The main cavalry thrust was broken. The Lannister forces pulled back in disarray, leaving the field strewn with their dead and wounded. Stannis pressed forward in T. He center, his own knights cheering the king's name, though the fighting was far from done. Ned took stock. They had repelled the charge, but at great cost. Bodies of men in Baratheon livery lay side by side with the red and gold of House Lannister. He saw a swirl of motion near a small cluster of trees, where Karen's men had battled fiercely. Fire flickered. Someone had ignited a patch of dry brush. Shouts rose. Ned signaled his captains to keep the line, to not chase the fleeing knights too far. He worried it might be a trap to lure them out of position. Indeed, moments later, a fresh wave of Lannister infantry emerged from the haze, pikes leveled. They slammed into Ned's battered formation. The noise was deafening, men roaring, steel ringing, the dull thuds of shields colliding. Ned fought in the press, elbow to elbow with his soldiers. He stabbed one man in the belly, pivoted away from a swinging mace, felt a spear glance off his pauldrons. His head rang from the closeness of it all. War was no tourney, no neat display of skill. It was a butchery. Nearby, a burly Lannister footman bashed aside two Baratheon spearmen, stepping over them to confront Ned. The man hefted a cruel-looking axe, face twisted behind a half-visor. Ned brought up his sword, meeting the downward strike. The force rattled his bones. Sparks flew. The footman kicked Ned's shield, staggering him. Gasping, Ned parried a second blow, felt his arm scream in pain from the impact, and managed a lunge that caught the footman in the gap between breastplate and thigh. The man's bellow turned into a wet gasp. He collapsed, pulling free of Ned's blade with a spurt of blood. Panting, Ned barely had time to reorient before more men pressed in. He glimpsed a swirl of black hair and silver armor up ahead. Stannis himself had driven his cavalry forward, slamming into the Lannister ranks from the side. The effect was devastating. A roar went up from the Baratheon men as they sensed victory. The Lannisters began to break and flee, dropping pikes, some flinging off helmets to run faster. A ragged cheer erupted. Ned forced himself to remain upright, scanning for danger. The battered remains of Tywin's vanguard retreated toward Harrenhal's direction. Jaime Lannister was nowhere in sight, presumably pulled back to regroup. The plain was theirs, for the moment, but the cost was horrifying. Hundreds of Baratheon dead or wounded sprawled among an equal or greater number of Lannisters. The crows would feast tonight. Stannis reined in his horse near Ned. The king's face and armor were spattered with mud and blood, but his cold eyes still burned. "Well fought," he said tersely, which for Stannis was high praise indeed. "We have driven them back. We press on by dawn, before they can regroup fully." Ned, chest-heaving, nodded. "We should see to the wounded first, gather the men into some semblance of formation." He glanced around, seeing men moaning, calling for the maesters. "And we might consider sending an offer to Tywin for surrender." Stannis cast him a sharp look. "You believe he'll accept? He has never surrendered in his life." "No," Ned admitted, "but it may sap his morale if we appear magnanimous. Let it never be said we refused a chance for peace." Stannis pursed his lips. After a moment he grunted. "Very well. Send a rider under a flag of truce. Offer the Lannisters a chance to bend the knee, yield Harrenhal, and turn over Jaime. In return, we grant them mercy. See what they do with it." Ned bowed his head. "As you command." He turned away, feeling his heart pounding beneath sweaty mail. A wave of exhaustion threatened to crush him, but there was no time to yield to it. He began organizing the men, calling out instructions, sending captains to find the wounded. The smell of death hung thick in the midday sun. Buzzing flies swarmed the air. Ned heard screams of horses being put down, the clash of steel as men dispatched the mortally wounded. By late afternoon, they had reclaimed the field entirely. A ring of scouts watched for any sign of a renewed Lannister attack. A flag of truce was raised, and under it, a single Stormland knight rode forward to parley. He returned 2 hours later, shaken. "My lord, my king," the knight reported to Stannis and Ned. "I made it near the Lannister lines. They fired arrows at my feet before I even approached. I shouted the terms, but no one answered, except a voice from behind the lines that said, 'We'll see you on the morrow.' Then they loosed more arrows, so I fled." Stannis gave a short, humorless laugh. "So that is the measure of Tywin Lannister's courtesy. Very well. So be it. We press on." The king ordered the army to move again at dawn. Men groaned at the prospect. Most had fought a brutal engagement that day, but rest was short. They had to maintain pressure on the Lannisters, deny them time to dig in. The rest of the day was spent burning the dead, gathering supplies from the field, and making sure no pockets of Lannister troops lingered behind the lines. Ned forced himself to help bury or burn some of the men from the north. He recognized their faces as men he'd brought south, trusting them to his service. Now they were lifeless lumps of flesh and bone, soon to be ash. He said a quiet prayer to the old gods for each. That night, as Ned collapsed onto a small cot in his command tent, all he could see in his mind's eye were flames licking at corpses, dead horses scattered in the grass, and the anguished expressions of the wounded. This was what it meant to back Stannis in open war. Had he done the right thing, or simply unleashed a new wave of horror upon the realm? He thought of Sansa and Arya, praying that the gods would spare them from seeing such carnage. Then he thought of Robert, big-hearted Robert, who had raged in battles but also joked and roared with laughter. Would Robert have wanted this? The crown was a bloody weight indeed, and the realm was drowning in it. At length, he sank into exhausted sleep, images of clashing steel swirling in restless dreams. They advanced at first light, driving deeper into the riverlands. Smoke rose on the horizon from new fires, a sign that the Lannisters burned what they could not hold. Twice more, skirmishes broke out as outriders collided. More men died. Though these engagements were smaller, they were no less savage. Each step forward was bought in blood. The road turned muddy from passing thousands of men, wagons, and horses. The summer sun beat down, causing men to sweat beneath chain and leather. Water grew precious, and the supply lines stretched tenuously behind them. Davos and the quartermasters did their best, but there were grumblings that if the Tyrells refused to join, the army might run short before the campaign's end. At last, Harrenhal's black spires loomed near. The fortress sat on the northwestern edge of the God's Eye, its melted towers reaching skyward like the twisted talons of some giant beast. Smoke curled from the squat keep, suggesting Tywin's men were inside preparing defenses. Stannis set up a ring of camp around the castle, though Harrenhal's vast size meant they couldn't surround it completely. That night, the king gathered his war council to plan a siege. Ned stood with the other lords, scanning the rough sketches of Harrenhal's walls. Even half-rotted, the fortress was formidable. "The next step is to draw them out or starve them," Stannis declared. "We block their supply lines, ensure no food or reinforcements enter. If they try to sally forth, we smash them." Lord Caron shrugged. "That could take months, Your Grace. They have stores, perhaps more men than we think. We risk giving them time to call upon reinforcements from the Westerlands." "We cannot scale those walls easily," Davos said, rubbing his chin. "The place is massive. We'd lose too many men in a direct assault." Ned frowned. "We could attempt to fortify a camp on the far side, near the lake, but that ground is boggy. It might hamper cavalry, but also hamper us. Tywin might slip away in the night if we can't maintain a ring. Still, we can try." Stannis pressed his lips together. "I will not let him slip. I want him broken. Harrenhal is cursed, they say, but let it be the Lannisters' tomb." So the siege began. They pitched the tents in a loose crescent around Harrenhal, posted watchers, and prepared for the slow strangulation of the fortress. But Tywin was not idle. Within 2 days, the Lannisters tested Baratheon lines at night with small attacks, burning siege engines, stampeding horses. Ned was roused repeatedly by panicked shouts, forced to throw on his mail and rush into the dark. Arrows hissed through the gloom. Men died with muffled screams. Tents blazed. By dawn, the chaos would subside, leaving them with fewer supplies and more corpses. Each day, the men woke more exhausted, more battered. Harrenhal's walls loomed impassively, as if mocking them. In the second week of the siege, the king called Ned to his command pavilion at dusk. Stannis stood near a brazier, the orange glow dancing on his stern face. Davos and Lord Caron were present as well, both looking tense. The king wasted no pleasantries. "We have word that Jaime Lannister leads a force in the fortress's southern tower. They may be planning a breakout. My scouts have spied unusual troop movements on that side. I want to meet it head-on." Ned felt a chill. Jaime was a formidable commander, as well as a deadly swordsman. If he led a breakout, it could be a savage fight in the night. "Your Grace, we should prepare a trap. Let them emerge from that tower into a ring of pikes and archers." Stannis nodded curtly. "I want you to position your men accordingly, Lord Stark. Use the cover of darkness. Davos will help you deploy." Caron interjected. "Perhaps I should command that flank, Your Grace. Lord Stark has been tireless, but his men are weary from the earlier attacks." Stannis gave him a cold look. "No, I want Stark there. He and Jaime have a certain history. Let it be Ned Stark who breaks the kingslayer. Prepare your men by nightfall tomorrow. That is all." The king's words allowed no argument. Ned bowed stiffly, though inside he felt uneasy. Fate seemed determined to pit him against Jaime Lannister once more. Memories of that day in King's Landing flickered in his mind, when Jaime's men ambushed him in the street and slaughtered his guard. If Jaime had the chance, would he kill Ned just as readily now? Ned withdrew from the tent with Davos, who clapped him on the shoulder. "We'll place hidden trenches, sharpen stakes. If Jaime breaks forth, he'll impale his own cavalry before they can do too much harm. Then your men can close in. It's a wise plan, or as wise as we can muster." Ned mustered a grim smile. "Thank you, Davos. Let's pray it works." They spent the following night quietly digging shallow trenches in the dark, placing sharpened stakes, positioning archers behind low ridges, all while the main camp feigned routine. On the second night, watchers reported flickers of torches within the southern tower, movement that suggested Jaime's forces readied themselves. Ned barely slept, pacing the lines, adjusting positions, whispering final orders to his captains. The men were tense, anticipating a fierce blow to fall at any moment. The moon was slim, the night thick with clouds. Wind moaned across the plain, carrying the distant calls of nightbirds. Then, near midnight, a sudden horn blast echoed from Harrenhal's walls. Torches bloomed along the ramparts, and a drawbridge lowered over the deep moat fronting the southern tower. A column of Lannister cavalry emerged, hoofs pounding, streaming out into the darkness. Archers on the fortress walls fired cover shots, whistling arrows into Baratheon lines. Ned's men crouched low, shields raised, as the arrow storm rattled down. Screams erupted as some found their marks. But the real danger was the cavalry thunder. They came in a rush, knights in half-armor, swords gleaming in torchlight, a swirl of red cloaks and gold-painted shields, a golden lion standard leading them. At the head, Ned glimpsed Jaime Lannister, silver-gilt hair shining even in the dim light, sword held high. The cavalry galloped toward Ned's line, only to crash into the hidden trenches and stakes. Horses shrieked, toppling forward. Men tumbled into the sharpened stakes, skewered. The line of charging knights buckled. Ned seized the moment, bellowing, "Archers loose!" His men unleashed a deadly volley. Arrows rained upon the tangled Lannister cavalry. Horses thrashed, knights floundered in the pits. Jaime himself leapt clear of his falling charger, rolling across the ground before springing up, sword still in hand. Ned's men roared and surged forward with spears. The battered Lannisters tried to regroup, but confusion reigned. Some had cleared the first trench, but found themselves mired in the second line of defenses. Ned advanced at a measured pace, sword gripped, scanning for Jaime. He saw the kingslayer slash down 2 Baratheon soldiers in quick succession, whirling with lethal grace. If that man found an open path, he could do terrible damage. "Surround him," Ned shouted, pointing. A half-dozen of his best men advanced, but Jaime carved through them, a savage dance of steel. Another volley of arrows arced overhead, striking Lannister knights trying to scale the stakes. Ned ducked a stray arrow, heart pounding. Shouts rose from the darkness. More Lannisters poured forth, determined to break the trap. Still, the funnel was too narrow, the obstacles too well placed. The better part of Jaime's cavalry was pinned. Ned's soldiers closed in from both sides, ring by ring. Horns blared from the main camp, signifying reinforcements. Through the flickering torchlight, Ned saw a sudden opening. Jaime was pushing east, trying to carve a path away from the stakes, likely seeking higher ground or a path to circle behind Ned's lines. Ned sprinted forward with grim resolve. A Lannister man-at-arms lunged at him with a spear. Ned ducked aside, yanked the spear free, and slammed the hilt of his sword into the man's helm, sending him crashing to the ground. Then he pressed on, sweat streaming under his helm. He spotted Jaime, locked in combat with 2 Baratheon soldiers. Both wore the flaming stag. One lunged, but Jaime sidestepped and slashed the man's throat. The second brought down a mace, only for Jaime to parry and riposte, leaving the soldier crumpled. In seconds, both were down, and Jaime whirled, eyes blazing, searching for the next foe. Ned raised his sword. Their gazes locked across the carnage. Jaime recognized him instantly, a feral grin twisting his features. "Stark," he said, voice carrying over the din. "I hoped I'd find you." Ned's heart hammered. He advanced warily. "You found me." They stood amidst chaos. Men screaming, flames licking at scattered torches, the acrid stench of blood in the air. Jaime lunged without warning, forcing Ned to parry hastily. The Kingslayer's strength jolted Ned's arm, nearly knocking the blade from his grip. Jaime rained blows in a flurry, each stroke expertly placed. Ned gave ground, searching for a chance to counter. They danced across muddy earth, stepping over bodies. Jaime's grin was cold, eyes narrowed. "You've improved since last time, or you're just more desperate," he said. Slashing in a low arc, Ned caught it on his sword, pivoting to the side. Sparks flared. "I've no wish to kill you," Ned panted, though even as he said it, he knew it might come to that. "How honorable," Jaime spat, pressing in again with a faint high, then a thrust low. Ned barely caught it with his sword, steel screeching. They were chest to chest for a heartbeat. Ned could see the sweat on Jaime's brow, the fury in his eyes. Around them, Baratheon soldiers closed in, but they dared not intervene. Jaime's presence was that of a cornered lion. If anyone tried to catch him unawares, he might cut them down. 2 men circled, looking for an opening, but Ned raised a hand to warn them back. This duel was personal, inevitable. Jaime battered Ned's sword aside, the force of the blow jolting Ned's shoulder. With a fluid twist, Jaime slashed at Ned's midsection. Ned dropped to one knee, letting the blade pass overhead, then thrust upward. Jaime turned aside just in time, grunting as the sword grazed his armor. They broke apart, breathing hard. A sudden cry from behind Jaime drew his attention, a Baratheon soldier hurling a spear. Jaime whirled, batted the spear aside in a shower of sparks. In that instant, Ned stepped in and slammed his pommel into Jaime's temple, the blow glancing off his gilded helm but still jarring him. Jaime staggered. Ned hooked a foot behind Jaime's ankle and sent him crashing to the ground. The Kingslayer tried to regain his feet, but Ned pressed his sword tip against Jaime's breastplate, panting. Blood dripped from a cut on Ned's left forearm. Jaime glared up, furious and unbowed. "Do it," he hissed. "Kill me if you dare." Ned felt the eyes of the men around them, the clangor of battle continuing in the distance. Here lay Jaime Lannister, unarmed for the moment, pinned. 1,000 reasons told Ned to finish him, end the threat, avenge the dead. Yet memory flared. Ser Barristan's talk of honor, the vow to treat prisoners by the rightful king's justice. Another voice whispered. Jaime had tried to kill him once, had threatened his family. Would he show Ned any mercy? Were their roles reversed? He gave no time for doubt. The realm needed justice, not another savage execution on a battlefield. Summoning his resolve, Ned barked at 2 soldiers. Disarm him. Secure him. He pressed his sword tip harder on Jaime's plate, ignoring the venom in the man's eyes. Yield, Ned demanded. Jaime's breath rasped. For an instant, Ned thought he might lunge up and impale himself on the sword just to strike at Ned. But at last, the kingslayer's hand eased away from the hilt, letting the blade clang to the ground. I yield, he said, voice bitter as bile. Men rushed in, hauling Jaime to his feet, stripping away his sword belt and helm. He stood defiant, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, eyes blazing. Ned pulled in a shuddering breath, stepping back. He felt the waves of exhaustion flood him, but the adrenaline would not yet subside. Jaime Lannister was a prize indeed. This might change the war. Tywin would be frantic to save his son. All around them, the night's ambush was ending. The Lannister breakout had failed. Bodies littered the field. A few groups of riders had escaped into the darkness, but Jaime's main thrust was broken. Ned sagged with relief that the plan had worked. But it was a hollow triumph, overshadowed by the moans of the dying. In the torchlight, Ned's men dragged Jaime toward the main camp. Ned followed, feeling the eyes of the men upon him. Some spat curses at Jaime, others jeered, but Ned ordered them to keep their distance. The king will decide his fate, he said. No harm is to come to him. Jaime shot him a glare over his shoulder. How noble, Stark. I suppose your friend Stannis will want my head on a spike to match my sister's. Shall I count the hours until the dawn? Ned said nothing, though the question was like a knife in his gut. Joffrey and Cersei had met the executioner's blade. Would Stannis do the same to Jaime without a second thought? Likely, and Tywin's fury would be beyond measure. If there was still hope of brokering some deal, Ned could only guess. But for now, he had to see Jaime delivered alive. Perhaps it would help end the war quickly if Tywin bargained. They reached the edge of the camp, where Stannis had come with a detachment of his knights to see the results of the breakout. Orcys cast the king's face in stark relief, his jaw clenched, eyes flicking across the field. When he spotted Jaime in chains, he dismounted briskly. So, Stannis said in a taut voice, we have the kingslayer. Jaime said nothing, merely glared, though his lip curled. A trickle of blood ran down his cheek from a cut on his brow. Stannis's gaze switched to Ned, who braced himself. Well done, Lord Stark. This is a blow to Tywin Lannister indeed. We shall see how quickly he breaks when he hears his precious son is our captive. Ned inclined his head. He yielded under my sword. I kept him alive in hopes this might help end the bloodshed. The king's mouth twisted. He studied Jaime for a long moment, then signaled his men. Take him under guard. He is to be bound hand and foot, day and night. Let him attempt no further escapes. I'll decide his fate soon enough. Jaime was dragged away, cursing under his breath. Stannis watched him go with cold satisfaction. A hush fell around them. The night stank of blood and ash. At last, Stannis turned to Ned and laid a gauntlet hand on his shoulder. An important victory. The Lannisters cannot hold out much longer, not without their great hero leading the cavalry. Rest now, Lord Hand. You've done well. Ned bowed numbly. Your Grace. The king departed. Men began to disperse. Ned stood there, half limp from exhaustion, letting the night wind cool his sweat-soaked hair. He wondered if Tywin would attempt negotiations now. Jaime Lannister was a fearsome champion, and Tywin's golden son, but Tywin was proud. Perhaps he would fight all the harder. In that swirl of uncertainty, Ned felt only the raw truth that war was pain, that the realm bled, and that he had become entwined in a cycle of death that Robert had once ended. Yet the difference was that now there was no Rhaegar Targaryen to blame, no mad king to dethrone. There was only a savage tangle of ambition and vengeance. He turned away, ignoring the calls of men celebrating around scattered fires. He had neither appetite nor thirst for victory's cheer. Tomorrow would bring more decisions, more tragedy. He thought of the letter he would have to send to King's Landing, urging that Sansa and Arya remain safe. He thought of his promise to see them home. Each step seemed heavier than the last. He headed to his tent, telling himself that the worst might soon be behind them if Tywin relented. But the feel of the warm blood still drying on his clothes told him the truth. A new storm was building, and the realm was far from peace. Though Stannis was rightful by law, the Lannisters would not yield easily. War's hammer blows would keep falling until either the lion broke or the stag was toppled. In the darkness, Ned prayed to the old gods for wisdom, for mercy. The crackling of distant fires and the groans of the wounded gave a dire refrain. Far away in the city, his daughters waited. Far away in the north, Robb waited, his bannermen restless. The realm's heart was split, battered by the violence of kings. Whether Ned Stark's secret backing of Stannis would ultimately save them all or doom them to further destruction weighed on his mind like a black stone. He was too weary to decide, too weary to do anything but drift into fitful sleep, dreams haunted by the thunder of hooves and the lion's roar echoing across a blood-soaked plain.